Copyright web novel. Chapter 1, Chapter 1 The Imprisoned Dragon. Chapter 1 The Imprisoned Dragon. Creak. The iron-bound dungeon door groaned open, allowing a sliver of long-forgotten light to spill inside. The sudden brightness stung his eyes, forcing the king to raise a hand and shield himself from the rare touch of sunlight. Moments later, the voices of two guards echoed in the corridor. What on earth did this brat do to end up here? You know this place is reserved for. You don't know. The second guard sounded genuinely surprised, but soon chuckled as he explained. They say the kid went to the Golden Pearl brothel. The madam thought she was being clever and gave him a man dressed as a woman. The moment his pants came halfway down, a fight broke out. Bieber? Isn't that even better? The first guard asked, baffled. He's the best in town. Even 3 lords praised him, said no one could match his skill. That's true, the companion sighed, sounding almost regretful at the waist. Still, a brawl's not enough to land someone in this dungeon. At most, they'd chop off a finger and let him go. Hold on, I haven't finished. They reached the cell, unlocked the wooden barred door, and shoved the half-conscious prisoner inside. Dusting his hands, one guard continued. This poor bastard had bad luck. He happened to beat up Lady Cyrilla's younger brother's favorite Bieber. Lord Coombs. Exactly. You know how much Coombs adores Bieber, he practically visits him every week. So when he saw Bieber get beaten, Coombs was furious. Ordered the boy beaten half to death, dragged him here, and told the warden personally to lock him in the death cells. Knowing Coombs' temper, I'd say this brat won't live past tomorrow. The 2 guards kept chatting casually as they walked away, never sparing so much as a glance at the king inside the cell. To them, he was little more than air. The king, however, was long used to such treatment. He glanced at the cell beside him, where a young man lay battered beyond recognition. Bloodshot violet eyes lingered on the boy, unreadable. Then, out of nowhere, his raspy, cutting voice broke the silence. Hey, your name's Fenley, isn't it? The guard jolted in surprise, a shiver running down his spine. Though the king had been imprisoned for nearly half a year, he had exchanged barely a dozen words with lowly guards like him. For one, the king was said to be mad, always raving, threatening to burn this or that person alive. For another, Lord Dennis Darklyn had repeatedly warned them never to engage him in conversation. Turning hesitantly, Fenley looked at the withered figure, messy white hair, gaunt face, the ragged look of a beggar rather than a monarch. Nervously, he replied. I didn't expect you to remember my name, why your majesty. Fortunately, the king did not lash out or rave. Instead, he asked in a calm, almost indifferent tone. I need food. And water. Fenley blinked. Hungry this early? Strange. Food had been delivered barely 2 hours ago. He didn't understand, but he also knew one thing, the king's request was not something a man of his station could refuse. Fenley gave a quick nod and was about to leave with his companion to fetch food when the king's voice rang out again. And one more thing. Fenley turned back. Beneath the pale, tangled strands of hair, the king's bloodshot, crimson-veined eyes gleamed with something unsettling. Calmly, almost casually, he commanded. Bring me some sacred oil. I'll need it tonight. Dash. Pain. Agonizing, searing pain. Lance's eyes snapped open. Aside from the unbearable ache that racked his body, his head was crammed with a jumble of chaotic memories that didn't belong to him. Just hours ago, he had been at home, playing League of Legends. Then out of nowhere a passenger jet had come crashing through his living room. What the hell? Did I transmigrate? Sorting through the fragments of memory in his head, he found it hard to accept. My name is Lance? A blacksmith, from Duskendale? What kind of sick joke is this? As his head throbbed, a voice whispered beside him. A hand slid across his thigh, smearing something slick and sticky on his skin. The greasy sensation made his stomach churn. What the hell is this guy doing? The memories he had inherited screamed at him. This world was crawling with degenerates. Get your filthy hands off me! His voice cracked, weak but sharp. He could only pray that his show of bravado would scare the stranger away. Instead, the darkness answered with a hoarse, eerie voice tinged with excitement. You're awake! Shit! It was a man. Even though Lance had half expected it, the confirmation made his gut tighten. The way this guy was touching him, there was no mistaking his intentions. Closer, come closer. I can't reach your shoulder. The man ignored Lance's hostility, barking the command with the authority of a king. Get the hell off me! Lance kicked and thrashed as the stranger tugged at his ankle, but his battered body was too weak. Fortunately, the man was no stronger, neither could overpower the other. Both of them panted heavily after the struggle, glaring in the dark. At last, the man snarled, voice filled with madness. You damned brat! You dare kick the face of the true dragon 3 times? Do you understand the sin you've committed? When I return to King's Landing, I'll burn you alive, reduce you to ashes and drag on fire. His fury was genuine, his tone wild. But Lance only scoffed. True dragon? Don't make me laugh. If you're really that powerful, why are you rotting in the same dungeon as me? Fool, the man roared. No cage can bind the true dragon. This is but a temporary rest. When I spread my wings once more, when dragon fire scorches the skies, this filthy city will be nothing but cinders. Dennis Darklin, that oath-breaking cur, will suffer my wrath. His voice rose, frothing with hysteria. Not just Darklin. Tywin Lannister. Rhaegar too. They think they can steal my throne, lock me away to die? Impossible. His words spiraled into manic frenzy. Burn them! Burn them all! Ha 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 ha! With each scream, he smashed his skull against the wooden bars, the thud echoing through the dungeon. Lance cursed under his breath. A lunatic! Who knows how long he's been locked up? At first, he felt a flicker of pity. But then, 2 names stabbed through his haze. Tywin Lannister? Rhaegar? A tidal wave of memories surged into his mind, nearly splitting his skull apart. Gritting his teeth, he pushed himself upright, straining to glimpse the figure through the faint moonlight leaking in. A withered frame. A gaunt, hollow face. Why your name? Lance demanded, breath ragged. Tell me your name. The man froze. Then, with a grotesque laugh, he clutched his face, peering through his fingers. You ask my name? Have the 7 kingdoms already forgotten their king? He lowered his hands. From between the pale fingers, Lance saw them 2 violet eyes, shot through with madness, burning in the dark. And then, the voice rolled out of his throat, not merely speech, but a dragon's growl. Before you stands the son of Aerys Targaryen II. King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. Protector of the realm, the one and only true dragon. The voice rose into a roar. Aerys Targaryen II. Chapter 2, Chapter 2 The Kingsguard. Chapter 2 The Kingsguard. There's no way this place can hold so many people. The thought popped into Lance's head out of nowhere, completely out of place in the tense silence of the dungeon. So I transmigrated, fine. But why the hell did I have to end up locked in with a complete lunatic? He shook his head, feeling the weight of despair settle in. Lance had seen this story before, at least on screen. He didn't know every detail of Aerys II Targaryen's life, but he knew the man's infamous title. The Mad King. The last king of House Targaryen's dynasty. And just how insane was he? Well, when his son Rhaegar was accused of abducting Lyanna Stark, the daughter of Rickard Stark, Warden of the North, Aerys had responded not by seeking justice, but by ordering Rickard Stark and his heir, Brandon, executed in the cruelest way possible. As if that weren't enough, Brandon's companions, noble heirs from the north, the Vale and the Riverlands, even Jonaran's fosterling from the Eyrie, were all put to death alongside them. And Aerys didn't stop there. He demanded that Jonaran hand over Ricard's second son, one Eddard Stark. Jonaran refused. Instead, he joined forces with Robert Baratheon of Storm's End and raised the banners of rebellion. Just like that, Aerys had turned 4 of the 7 kingdoms, the North, the Vale, the Riverlands and the Stormlands, into mortal enemies. Even for a Targaryen, whose family tree was littered with lunatics, this level of self-destruction was impressive. Truly worthy of the name Mad King. Still, judging from the present situation, it seemed the timeline hadn't reached that point yet. Boy! Aerys's sharp voice cut through the silence, displeasure dripping from every syllable. You stand before your king, why do you not kneel? Lance snorted. Kneel, my ass. From the memories he had inherited, he already had a rough idea of his current circumstances and why the so-called ruler of the 7 kingdoms was rotting in the same cell as him. And honestly, he couldn't make sense of Westerosi logic at all. What kind of king shows up in a vassal's stronghold with just 1 Kingsguard knight and a handful of attendants, then has the audacity to announce in front of everyone that he's there to arrest Lord Dennis Darklyn of Duskendale? That wasn't courage. That was suicide. Of course, considering the Targaryens' long history of questionable decision-making, it wasn't all that shocking. Even Daenerys, the so-called mother of dragons who would come later, wasn't exactly known for strategic brilliance. But at least she had 3 dragons. And Aerys? Nothing. Not even a lizard. What was he expecting that a single Kingsguard knight could fight off thousands of soldiers from Duskendale? If Tywin Lannister hadn't marched the Lannister host to surround the city almost immediately, Aerys would have been chopped into pieces by Dennis Darklyn long ago. Even so, Dennis Darklyn had managed to stand against the royal host for half a year. Which meant this lunatic of a king had already been rotting in the dungeon for 6 months. Even a sane man would likely lose his mind in a place like this. And Aerys Targaryen? He hadn't exactly started out sane to begin with. Exhausting. Lance lay flat on the cold stone floor, staring into the oppressive darkness, feeling utterly done with life. Grr. Right on cue, his stomach betrayed him with a loud growl. He suddenly remembered he hadn't eaten a single bite since the night before. Add in the torture he'd endured through most of the night, and his body was ready to give out. Clink! Something hit the ground beside him. Lance turned his head, and a warm aroma freshly baked grain drifted into his nostrils. Eat, boy, came Aerys's hoarse, sinister whisper. Without food, you won't survive. Lance hesitated, but in truth, Dennis Darklyn had shown surprising restraint. Though he had imprisoned the king, he had not humiliated him. Aerys still received decent meals, soft, sweet bread rather than the rock-hard black loaves normally tossed to prisoners. Perhaps Darklyn feared killing the king outright. Aerys alive was a bargaining chip. Aerys dead was worthless. Biting into the bread, washing it down with cool well water, Lance felt strength trickle back into his limbs. Hey, old man, he muttered at last. What the hell were you smearing on me just now? He didn't feel right mocking the man after eating his food, but the memory still gnawed at him. Aerys, who looked older than his years after half a year in chains, leaned weakly against the bars. His violet eyes gleamed faintly in the dark. Sacred oil! Sacred oil! Lance frowned. He wasn't a priest, but even a blacksmith's apprentice knew what that was used for. That's for baptisms or prayers. Don't tell me you're holding my funeral in advance. And for the record, I'm not one of your 7 gods' sheep. I'm a firm materialist. Idiot, Aerys spat softly, dismissing the jest. Then, gripping the bars, he pulled himself upright. His sharp eyes locked onto Lance. Despite the darkness, Lance could see something burning in them: madness, yes, but also conviction. What is your name, boy? Lance, he answered, for once not joking. Do you have a surname? Surnames were the line between nobles and commoners. Blacksmith's sons had none. But after a pause, Lance said quietly. Lot. Call me Lancelot. Ku-ka-ka. Aerys laughed, a rasping, broken sound like a rusty saw dragged over wood. Yet he seemed delighted. In the shadows, he smoothed his ragged clothes, straightened his back, and lifted his chin like he was adjusting a crown that wasn't there. Lancelot. His voice grew solemn, almost regal. Will you swear yourself as my Kingsguard? Will you cleanse the realm of traitors and mete out their punishment in fire and blood? The Kingsguard. The words stunned Lance. They had barely known each other half a day. He was no knight, just a nameless blacksmith who'd stumbled into this nightmare. Surely the man had gone mad, pinning his hopes on a stranger in rags. Still. Lance glanced down at the bread in his hand. A debt of food was still a debt. And considering he'd already made an enemy of Sir Coombs, chances were slim he'd survive past tomorrow anyway. Fine. If I'm going to die, I may as well play along with this pitiful old man's fantasy. He shoved the last of the bread into his mouth, chewed hard, and forced himself to his feet. Dropping to one knee before the bars, he lowered his head and declared. To serve you is my honor, your grace. Aerys's cracked lips spread into a satisfied grin. He chuckled softly, then shuffled into the corner of the cell. From beneath a pile of straw, he dragged out a filthy, blood-stained cloak. In the faint moonlight, it was clear it had once been white. He shook the dust from it and laid it solemnly across Lance's shoulders. Lancelot. You will wear the white cloak as your armor, live by honor as your law, and follow my command as your highest duty. You will guard the Targaryen crown and bloodline with your life. By Dragon Fire, you shall scourge the traitors of the seven hells. His ragged fingernails scratched across Lance's shoulder as he placed the tattered Kingsguard cloak upon him. Ding! A clear chime echoed in Lance's ears. Identity detected, Kingsguard. Template system activated. Chapter 3, Chapter 3 King of the Dothraki. Chapter 3 King of the Dothraki. System. When Lance heard that word, excitement surged through him uncontrollably. He quickly opened his eyes and sure enough, a semi-transparent panel appeared before him. Name, Lancelot. Acquired title, Kingsguard, incomplete, A. Available templates, none. Available template draws, A rank ×1. Bonus, since the host's first acquired title has reached A rank, you are rewarded with one SS rank character experience card. The interface was simple and clear, easy enough for Lance to understand at a glance. That Kingsguard, incomplete, clearly meant he wasn't a true member of the Kingsguard yet. After all, he didn't even have a decent sword in his hand, and here in this desolate place, it was just him and Aerys. Perhaps only after returning to King's Landing and being formally knighted before the court would he truly gain the full Kingsguard title. But that could wait. Right now, the most important thing was the template draw. Heart pounding, Lance tapped open the A-rank template draw interface. A dazzling prize pool spread before his eyes. White, D-rank 10% Lancel Lannister, young Valder Frey, old Hostine Tully. Green, C-rank 15% Patrick Mallister, Ed Muir Tully, Marin Trant. Blue, B-rank 20% Janos Slint, Great Jan Umber, Beric Dondarrion. TCH, all small fry. Lance lost interest in scrolling further down. Still, the fact that even trash like Janos Slint could sit at the same tier as Great Jan Umber meant the system clearly wasn't judging by his personal bias. That coward must have had some hidden qualifications after all. Fortunately, the odds of pulling from A rank and above were much higher, so it wasn't likely he'd end up stuck with one of these mediocrities. Now time to see who was in the real prize pool. Lance rubbed his palms together in anticipation. Purple, A rank 40% Eddard Stark, Jaime Lannister, Preamputation, Brienne of Tarth, Sandor Clegane the Hound, Gregor Clegane the Mountain. Ha! Now we're talking! Lance's eyes lit up in delight. Every single name was a powerhouse legends known to anyone who had ever heard the tales of Westeros. If he could obtain one of those templates, Lance knew he could become a renowned knight anywhere in the Seven Kingdoms. But that still wasn't enough. Escaping Stone Dance with Aerys at his side, those names alone wouldn't make it possible. Keep looking. Red, S rank 10% Khal Drogo, Oberyn Martell, Syrio Forel, Rhaegar Targaryen. As expected, the S rank templates were much stronger, every single one of them monstrous in their own right. Lance, however, couldn't help but raise a brow. Drogo? Oberyn the Red Viper? And they were only S rank? Then what kind of monsters sat at SS or SSR? Swallowing hard, he scrolled further down. A burst of golden light nearly blinded him. Gold, SS rank 4.9% Barry Stan Selmy, Prime, Robert Baratheon, Youth, Arthur Dayne, Daemon Targaryen, Maegor Targaryen. What? Even Arthur Dayne is only SS. That was the Sword of the Morning himself. If he wasn't top tier, the system must be broken. But, on second thought, Lance's heartbeat quickened. If Dayne was only SS, then the ones at SSR, he already had a suspicion. With breath growing ragged, he opened the SSR tier. His eyes widened as streaks of prismatic darkness filled the screen. Black, SSR rank 0.1% Azor Ahai, wielder of Lightbringer. Daenerys Targaryen, mother of dragons. Sir Gal Adon of Morn, the perfect knight. Garth Greenhand. Seven Hells. Every single name was a legend from the Age of Heroes, with the lone exception of Daenerys, though in truth, her place among them was well earned. She had 3 dragons, after all. By blood alone, her gift for dragon riding surpassed even Aegon the Conqueror himself. No teachers, no tradition, yet she had tamed 3 dragons on her own, immune to fire, ruling flame itself. That alone made her legend undeniable. If Lance could draw one of these. Wait. If he actually got Daenerys, would the system hand him dragons too? Or would he be left as the mother of dragons without any dragons? A glance at the pitiful 0.1% odds put that thought to rest. No use dreaming. S or SS would already be a miracle. Dash. You may rise now, Sir Lancelot. Aerys' hand rested lightly on his shoulder. Seeing his newly appointed Kingsguard still kneeling and trembling, the king assumed it was excitement from the honor bestowed upon him. But Lance wasn't trembling from loyalty. His blood boiled from the sheer anticipation of the draw. Show me how far this power can go. Drawl. At his command, the templates began to spin. Countless cards, each glowing with different colors: white, green, blue, purple, red, gold, even prismatic black shuffled past in a blur. And then, a crimson glow rose before his eyes. Yes. Lance clenched his fists. An S rank. It wasn't the ultimate jackpot, but neither was it a failure. 10% odds, and he'd hit it. Good enough. Still, he vowed he would find a way to reach the higher draws. The scarlet card dissolved into motes of light and sank into his body. Current template, Khal Drogo, assimilation 30%. Description: the Great Khal of the Dothraki Sea. His braid, unbroken in countless battles, reached to his heels. A warlord whose strength was unmatched, until death came by a common wound. I will lead my Khalasar west to the ends of the world. I will ride wooden horses across the black salt water and do what no Khal before me has ever done. Power surged through Lance's veins. His wounds sealed, his muscles burned with vigor, every inch of his body brimming with violent strength. For a moment, he felt as though he could punch through stone walls. Deep breath steadied him. It wasn't true invincibility, only the intoxicating rush of sudden power. At last, he stood tall. "Why, your grace?" Aerys blinked at the sudden question. "Why choose me? I'm no knight. Just a worthless blacksmith. I landed here because I angered a noble for beating his favorite whore." The king grinned, his violet eyes gleaming with madness. He brushed the dust from Lance's shoulder and said softly. "Perhaps, because you look so much like the man who last wore that white cloak." "A Kingsguard?" "Yes." Aerys nodded, his voice almost reverent. "For more than half a year, every night, I have prayed to the Seven and spoken his name Sir Gawain Gaunt. And now, you are his heir. His successor. My Kingsguard. So protect your king. Get me out of this cursed dungeon." For a heartbeat, the madness in Aerys' gaze flickered, and Lance glimpsed the wise, vibrant, charismatic king he might once have been. Lance lowered his head. Silence hung between them. When he raised his eyes again, his blue irises burned with a light even more unhinged than Aerys'. The scent of blood, tinged with wild grass, filled the air. His body shifted in subtle, primal ways, his muscles, his very bones, shaping themselves for the curve of a Dothraki Iraq. "I will lead you out, your grace." His voice was low, steady, filled with conviction. "Not only that Dennis Darklyn, and all who dared defy the might of House Targaryen, will pay the price in blood." Chapter 4, The Sudden Uprising. Chapter 4, The Sudden Uprising. Creak. The groan of a rotten iron gate pierced the silence, the sound sharp enough to set one's teeth on edge. A sliver of pale, imperfect moonlight bled into the dungeon as boots struck against the stone floor, each tap echoing off the damp walls. Judging from the footsteps, more than one person had come. "Open it." Coombs gave the order with a frown as he reached the barred wooden cell. From his breast pocket he pulled a perfumed handkerchief, pressing it to his nose. The sweet scent of powder and rosewater dulled the stench of filth, but not enough to ease his disgust. As Lady Cyrilla's only brother, Coombs had lived a pampered life since the siblings crossed the narrow sea to Duskendale. His sister had married Lord Dennis Darklyn, and Coombs had never tasted hardship again. He cast a quick glance at the neighbouring cell. The king hadn't stirred, still motionless. Likely asleep. At his command, Fenley quickly stepped forward, opened the cell door, and with another guard's help hauled up the broken figure slumped on the floor. Lance dangled between them, barely conscious. "You two seem to have found yourselves a curious little game," Coombs drawled, eyes flicking to the white cloak draped over Lance's shoulders. He remembered well the garment's true master, a knight who had once followed the king into Duskendale, fearless and proud, only to be struck down within days by the town's sword master, Simon Hollard. The cloak had only been surrendered because the king, half mad with despair, had threatened to starve himself unless Dennis handed it over. Now, somehow, the tattered white hung on the back of this pitiful smith. Coombs did not bother asking. A half-starved king and a fool of a blacksmith who had gotten himself jailed after whoring in the wrong place? Together, there was no telling what madness might brew. Lord Coombs. Lance raised his head weakly, lips pale from days of torment. His voice was hoarse, breaking. At that moment, a lithe figure sauntered forward from Coombs's side. The scrape of flint, the flare of flame soon, the neglected candelabrum on the table was burning, throwing flickering light across the chamber. I deeply regret what I did to you, Sir Biber." As the glow revealed a face so finely sculpted it was almost impossible to tell man from woman, marred now by a cruel bruise across one cheek, Lance's words spilled out in desperate submission. "Please, Lord Coombs, for the sake of my years of loyal service to House Darklyn, forgive me this once." The plea was pitifully earnest, as if the tortures he had endured had already broken his will. He had been a smith in Duskendale since boyhood, forging countless blades for the Darklins. Tisk, tisk. Coombs clicked his tongue, lips twisting into a mocking smile. His silken doublet clung to his frame, black and gold diamonds embroidered across the chest the crest of House Darklyn. A jewel-studded sword hung at his hip, its emerald pommel worth a small fortune. He looked every inch the pampered noble, nothing like the refugee boy who had once fled mere in rags beside his sister. "He's begging, sweetheart," Coombs said with a smirk, cocking his brow at his companion. "Perhaps you might be merciful, show him a touch of forgiveness." "Not a chance." Byber's reply was sharp, his voice high and cutting, almost indistinguishable from a woman's. Few could guess the truth that he was no woman at all. Lifting the candelabrum, Byber swayed forward with a dancer's grace. His eyes were cold, filled with disdain as they locked onto Lance, the man who had once dared to insult him. The guards shifted uneasily behind them, their throats audibly bobbing as they swallowed. Between Byber's sculpted body, his revealing attire, and the predatory glint in his gaze, desire and unease mingled in the foul air. This was the rot of the age, its decadence, its cruelty. With long, pale fingers, Byber reached down, seized Lance's chin, and tilted it upward. Two pairs of eyes locked, one filled with disdain and icy contempt, the other burning with naked hatred and loathing. "Kill him!" Byber's voice cracked like a whip. He had seen the insult in Lance's gaze, raw and unmasked. For all his trade as a courtesan, he still had pride, and that pride had been spat upon. Coombs, however, only stood where he was, lips curved in faint amusement. As one of Byber's many admirers, he had never minded the man's business. On certain nights, he had even joined in or watched, entertained. But what Lance had done, that had crossed a line. Fenley and the other guard exchanged a glance. Slowly, one drew a dagger from his boot. Technically, Byber had no authority to command them, but Coombs was standing behind him, and Coombs's will carried the weight of Lady Cyrilla's protection. Even Lord Dennis himself rarely dared chastise her brother. Just as Fenley raised the blade, Lance cried out desperately. "Wait! I have a way to save Duskendale, Lord Coombs." "Stop!" The order was sharp. Coombs's brows furrowed as he waved the guards back. He shoved Byber aside and stepped forward, studying the broken man in the white cloak. Once, Coombs himself had hurled that very cloak to the king, a mockery, a token of surrender. And now it clung to the shoulders of this pitiful smith. "Speak, then," Coombs said, voice low. "Tell me your way, boy." He doubted a low-born fool could have any solution worth hearing. But after 6 months of siege, even Coombs knew Lord Tywin's patience was thinning. And if this cloak had been placed on Lance's shoulders by Aerys himself, perhaps there was something more to this man than met the eye. We could work with Prince Rhaegar." Lance forced himself upright, feigning weakness, while his eyes never left the jewel-encrusted sword at Coombs's hip. "Closer, just a little closer." "Prince Rhaegar." Coombs's hand shifted, instinctively resting on the sword hilt, wary of the sudden suggestion. "Yes, my lord," Lance replied, swallowing hard, masking the glint of calculation in his eyes. His tone softened, almost coaxing. "Think. If the king were to die here in Duskendale, who benefits most?" "It won't be us," Coombs muttered coldly. He knew well enough. Branded as traitors, the Darklands' only shield was the hostage king. Once Aerys was gone, the royal host would storm the city, slaughtering them to the last. But then, a thought struck him, sudden and sharp. "You mean?" "Exactly, my lord." Lance's voice rose, urgent, persuasive. "As long as the king lives, Prince Rhaegar cannot take the throne. But if we quietly sent word to the prince, told him the king would die in Duskendale, and that in return all charges against Lord Dennis would be forgotten, do you not think he would agree? Rhaegar is a man of passion, a man of vision. Do you truly believe he will be content to remain a prince when the crown could be his?" Lance's words coiled like a spell. Coombs found his own breath quickening, pulse hammering. The plan was bold, reckless yet tantalizingly possible. He had to tell his sister. Quickly. But then, from the other cell, a voice thundered like madness itself. You treacherous worms! Cowards! Filth from the sewers! It was the King Aerys himself, clinging to the bars like a caged beast, his eyes wild. Scheming with my son, plotting my death in my very presence. You think the dragon's fire will not find you? One day soon it will burn House Darkland to ash, burn your mongrel souls straight to the seven hells. And then came his laughter shrill, manic, echoing like nails down stone. It grated against Coombs's nerves. With a single sharp glance, he sent Fenley forward. The guard obeyed instantly, boots slamming into the king's ribs. None of them dared strike the king without reason, but Coombs's will was law. To defy him was far more dangerous than to offend a mad monarch. Still, Coombs knew the truth in his own mind, every man in this cell was already dead. They had heard too much. My lord! Lance's faint whisper rose again, his body trembling as if drained of life. There are details I haven't told you yet. Please, come closer. He seemed so near death, so broken, that Coombs's guard dropped. What threat could this shattered smith possibly pose? Biber's eyes burned with fury. He longed to slit the man's throat where he lay. Coombs noticed the look, but only scoffed, brushing it aside. He stepped forward, leaned down, brought his ear close to Lance's lips. Speak. Yes. I'll tell you. I'll send you to hell. The words were a snarl. In a flash, Lance's elbow smashed into the temple of the guard beside him, bone cracked, the man crumpling in silence. At the same moment, Lance's other hand shot to Coombs's sword, wrenching at the hilt. Coombs reacted, clamping his grip like iron on Lance's wrist, but he had misjudged the smith's strength. Shing! The steel sang as it slid free. Coombs staggered back, stunned, his prized blade torn from its scabbard. And before Biber could even scream, the sword flashed. Schhk! The edge opened his throat in a single stroke. Arterial blood fountained high, splattering across Lance's face, painting him like a demon risen from the pit. Biber's eyes widened, disbelieving. His hands clawed at his neck, choking, gurgling, but nothing stemmed the flood. In seconds, Duskendale's prized courtesan collapsed to the ground with a dull, final thud. Chapter 5 Kill. Chapter 5 Kill. Lance felt nothing at all after taking his first life. No nausea. No trembling. No guilt. Perhaps it was because he was now fused with the template of Khal Drogo. After all, for the Khal of the Dothraki Sea, killing once or twice a day was nothing unusual. He clamped a hand tightly over Coombs' mouth and pressed the long sword against his throat. Try moving again, he hissed coldly, and I'll send you straight to the afterlife where that disgusting wretch is already waiting for you. Fenley, on the other hand, stood frozen. The sudden, bloody strike had stunned him into silence. Current character template, Khal Drogo fusion level, 30.2%. Lance frowned slightly. 2 kills, and the fusion bar had only crawled up by 0.2%. At this rate, he would need to slaughter hundreds to reach full synchronization. Still, even at 30%, the raw power coursing through him was more than enough to handle scum like these. If only he had a curved arak instead of this awkward long sword, his fighting edge would be even sharper. Open the cell door, he ordered, jerking his chin toward Fenley. And do it slowly. Don't even think about calling for help. Even if reinforcements arrive, I'll have more than enough time to kill you both first. Understand? Fenley swallowed hard, eyes darting to his master's bulging stare. Coombs' face was twisted in terror, silently begging him not to provoke Lance. Fortunately, cowardice was Fenley's strongest trait. Hands trembling, he pulled a key from his belt and, with great hesitation, unlocked the king's cell. I'm free. Aerys II stumbled out, tears streaming down his face. The Mad King, descendant of dragon lords, had been caged like an animal for half a year. For him, this was the greatest humiliation ever borne by a Targaryen. "Stay behind me, your grace," Lance murmured. Once the king slipped behind his back, Lance shot Fenley a wolfish grin. "Thank you, friend." Fenley managed a nervous laugh of relief. "And no probble. Shhk." The sword flashed, swift and merciless. Blood sprayed. Fenley clutched his throat in disbelief, eyes wide with betrayal, before collapsing beside Biber's corpse. Warm arterial spray splattered across Coom's face. He shook violently, eyes bulging, muffled cries trapped beneath Lance's palm. "What's that?" Lance whispered mockingly into his ear. "Let me guess, you're trying to say you can help us escape, if only I let you live." MMM. Coombs nodded frantically, tears welling, desperate for a chance. But Lance's tone turned colder, sharper than steel. "You and that whore of a sister of yours deserve nothing but death. If not for your scheming, Dennis Darklyn would never have dared to lay hands on the king." He pressed harder, forcing the blade to bite into flesh. "Half a year, this town has starved, surrounded, suffocating, while you glutted yourselves and ignored the dying. You made us all suffer." Coombs thrashed, but Lance's arm locked around him like iron shackles. He was utterly powerless. Lance leaned close, his voice a final verdict. "Don't worry, wretch from Myr. You won't be alone. Your sister, Dennis Darklyn. All of you will pay. I'll send every last one of you to the seventh hell." With a swift, merciless slash, the blade tore across his throat. Blood burst forth in a gory fountain. The once proud libertine of Duskendale toppled lifelessly, collapsing atop the body of his beloved Biber. Lance exhaled slowly, sheathing the sword. He glanced at the trembling, wild-eyed king. "It's time to go, your grace." When it was all over, Lance stood over the 4 corpses littering the floor. For the first time in what felt like forever, a smile tugged at his lips. In the memories of his former life, he had been Duskendale's youngest genius blacksmith. Not rich, but comfortable. His craft brought him food, drink, and respect. All of that ended when Coombs and his sister arrived. The sister, Cyrilla, wormed her way into the bed of Dennis Darklyn, Lord of Duskendale. And with her came ruin. Once a ruler who cared for his people, Dennis began listening only to her whispers. He defied the Iron Throne, demanding new charters, extravagant rights, and privileges for his townsfolk, concessions no sane king would grant. On the surface, it looked like benevolence. But everyone with half a brain could see the ambition beneath. Of course Aerys rejected such insolence. Dennis' answer? He withheld taxes from the crown. That act of rebellion set the stage. Aerys himself rode to Duskendale, unguarded, to face Dennis, and was promptly shackled like a common criminal. What shocked Lance most, however, was the king's own words. Even the mad audacity of kidnapping the king of Westeros had not come from Dennis. No. It had been Cyrilla's idea. And Dennis had agreed without hesitation. Whose clothes should I wear? Aerys' voice was shaky as he watched Lance strip the first guard, the one he had killed with a single elbow strike. The boy donned the man's white cloak and armor, folding the bloodied robe with surprising care before tucking it into his chest. The king glanced at the other corpses. All their clothes were soaked red, useless as disguises. For a moment, Aerys stood lost. "You won't need one." With a sharp clink, Lance snapped black iron shackles around the king's wrists. Aerys stiffened, his eyes darting upward in confusion. Lance only grinned, teeth flashing. "Time to move, old prisoner." Outside Duskendale. In the royal encampment, a storm raged beneath the tent of war. Every member of the king's council was present. Yet the one seated at the head was not a Targaryen, but a lion. He was tall and broad, with golden hair and a neatly groomed beard. His crimson plate armor gleamed in the lamplight, embossed with the proud lion of Lannister in beaten gold. A vast cloak, embroidered with threads of gold, hung from his shoulders. Around his neck lay the badge of office, a chain of golden hands linked together. His every movement radiated command. "Rescue or negotiation, my lords," one voice cried out. To storm the walls outright would be madness. If Dennis Darkland feels cornered, he may slay his grace on the spot. The speaker, Lord Lucerys Velaryon, slammed a fist onto the table. Silver hair gleamed in the firelight, proof of his proud Valyrian blood. The Velaryons had always been loyal to House Targaryen, and he would not sit idle while his king languished in chains. But the man at the head of the council hardly blinked. "Calm yourself, my lord." Tywin Lannister's voice was soft, but it carried like steel. His green eyes flickered with disdain. "Dennis Darkland is a coward. He will not dare strike. We cannot gamble with the king's life." Lucerys shot back, refusing to yield. Tywin only glanced at him, expression cool. "Perhaps he will strike. Perhaps not. And if he does?" Tywin's lips curled into something between a sneer and a smile, "Then we will have a better king." The words struck the tent like a thunderclap. Every man present knew who he meant. No one thought he was jesting. But neither did any dare speak against him. For all his madness, Aerys inspired little loyalty. And in truth, Prince Rhaegar seemed every inch the ruler his father was not. "I do not agree," Lucerys ground out, teeth clenched. His loyalty to the dragon line burned hot, even as doubt flickered across the others' faces. Before he could say more, the tent's flap burst open. A knight strode in, clad head to toe in white armor and cloak. His steps were heavy, resolute. Without a word, he unsheathed his long sword and drove the point into the dirt, kneeling on one knee. Both hands gripped the hilt. His deep voice carried through the tent, low and steady. "I swore an oath to protect the king. If you mean to storm Duskendale, then grant me one more night. At least allow me the chance to bring his grace back alive." All eyes turned. "Sir Barristan." Tywin's sharp gaze lingered on him. "How many men do you require? You understand too many will risk discovery." The knight rose slowly, drawing his sword free, his presence filling the tent like a prowling lion. His voice rumbled with unshakable resolve. "I, Barristan Selmy, require no one." Chapter 6, Chapter 6 The SS Experience Card. Chapter 6 The SS Experience Card. Duskendale. Two shadowy figures crept along the winding stair of the Dun Fort's tower path. The fortress loomed vast against the night, and from this height Lance could take in almost the entire town. To the east, the Blackwater Bay stretched wide, moonlight shimmering across the sea. To the north, a white cliff line stood sentinel, with roads threading between the chalk hills and the coast. Fishing villages dotted the roadside like scattered pearls. Southward, a rocky peninsula jutted into the water, forming a natural breakwater that sheltered the ships moored in the harbour. It was beautiful. 10 years he had lived here, yet Lance had never once seen his home from such a vantage. "Earlier, you said." Behind him, Aerys' hoarse voice rasped, low and dark. "That Dennis Darkland may have joined hands with Rhaegar, that my own son. What chance do you truly think there is of that?" "I don't know, Your Grace." Lance glanced back at him and shook his head. Perhaps it was the half-year spent in chains, but the king was frail, each step laboured and slow. To keep up appearances as his jailer, Lance matched his pace. And he was not lying. His talk of Rhaegar had been nothing but a fabrication half-truth spun to lull Coombs into dropping his guard. In his past life, Lance had only ever seen the show. What he knew of Rhaegar Targaryen came second-hand, scraps of dialogue at best. But from even those fragments, Lance's judgment was clear: Rhaegar was an idiot. Yes, an idiot with Valyrian good looks and Targaryen blood. No sane heir to the throne, no fit king in waiting would stand at a great tourney, in full view of lords and commons alike, and slight his own wife to crown another man's betrothed with a wreath of love. Love-struck didn't even begin to cover the madness. And yet, even after death, people still sighed and wept for Rhaegar, praising his nobility and vision. It was laughable. A broken world, where fools were celebrated, and anyone normal seemed the true anomaly. "You know him better than I ever could, Your Grace," Lance said at last. "He is your son. Tell me honestly, would Rhaegar truly do such a thing?" For a long while, the king was silent. His breath rasped as though every step pressed the question deeper into his chest. Finally, Aerys spoke. "Rhaegar was always courteous. He was born in grief, in the shadow of Summerhall's ashes. He kept to himself. He has my gift with a sword, but he prefers his silver-stringed harp." Truth be told, a rare softness crept into his tone. He'd have made a finer bard than a prince. The king almost sounded like a father then, words spilling forth with weary fondness. But the warmth did not last. His face darkened, teeth grinding. "And yet in all these months, no one has demanded my release. Not a word, not an envoy, not a soul to speak for me." His voice cracked into venom. "Rhaegar, he has been poisoned by Tywin Lannister, I know it. That golden bastard waits for my death, schemes to place Rhaegar on the throne, and then step by step, he will claim my crown for himself, until the ugly lion's arse sits upon the Iron Throne." The words poured out unguarded. Here, with the new and nameless Kingsguard beside him, Aerys could speak his paranoia freely. Lance said nothing. He only listened. He did not know the depth of the enmity between king and hand. But he did know the saying, "There is no prince who waits decades to be king." Even if Rhaegar himself hesitated, those who backed him would never waste so perfect an opportunity. And if the chance came, did Rhaegar truly never waver? Only he would know. But facts were facts. The prince had made no move to save his father. So the two went on, one behind the other, the king muttering curses under his breath until they reached the stairs base. They had passed patrols along the way 2-3 times, but Lance had bluffed them with ease. The way ahead, however, would not be so simple. At the stairs' end, torches burned bright. 4 men stood guard. The foremost was tall, broad, clad in deep yellow armor that glowed like fresh blood under the torchlight. His long chestnut hair hung loose, no helm to hide his sharp features. The moment he saw them approach, his hand dropped to his sword. "Sir Simon Hollard." Aerys' voice was a venomous hiss, thick with hate. He leaned toward Lance, whispering as they walked. "That one he slew Sir Gawain Gaunt. Be wary. Simon's blade is swift. Gawain barely lasted 3 breaths against him. Do not meet him head-on." With that, the king lowered his head, clasping his shackled wrists together, hair falling like a curtain over his face. He hunched his shoulders, playing the meek and broken captive to perfection. Lance narrowed his eyes, fingers brushing against the hidden folds of his white cloak. Then, just as quickly, he dropped his hand and painted a servile smile across his face. "Hold!" Sir Simon Hollard's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. Though Lance and the king were still several paces away, the knight's hand shot up to bar their path. At once, one of the soldiers behind him lifted a crossbow, its bolt silently leveled at Lance's chest. "Where are you going?" "Lord Coombs ordered me to bring the king before Lord Dennis and Lady Cyrilla." Lance made no effort to conceal Aerys' identity. Instead, he stepped aside with practiced ease, letting the torchlight fall on the prisoner at his back. Hollard craned his neck for a better look. The king shuffled forward in filthy robes, manacles biting into his wrists, head bowed, lips muttering curses beneath a veil of tangled hair. The sight drew a frown. "The king has never left his cell," Simon said coldly. "Why bring him out now?" "I couldn't say, sire," Lance replied with an honest shake of the head. "But Lord Coombs mentioned some arrangement with Prince Rhaegar." He leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough. You know as well as I do, we've been under siege for months. If this drags on, we'll starve where we stand. As he spoke, Lance patted the long sword at his hip. Before I left, Lord Coombs gave me his blade as token. Hollard's eyes dropped to the weapon. Sure enough, the pommel bore a green gem, gleaming in the firelight. Still, the knight pressed. And why does Coombs not deliver the king himself? They were entertaining a new prisoner, sire. Lance smirked, tilting his chin toward the castle's high towers. Lord Coombs was in rare spirits tonight. Perhaps even now he and Sir Biber are occupied. The leer that spread across Lance's face was lewd enough to be convincing. Ha! Men without honor, Hollard spat. At last, his shoulders eased. Word is, Coombs' manhood is as pathetic as a worm. If not for Lady Cyrilla, he'd never have found his way into Biber's bed. Ha! Ha ha ha! The soldiers barked with laughter, their wariness forgotten, their crossbows lowering. Biber, after all, was the prize every man in Duskendale coveted. Even common soldiers scraped and saved to afford his services. To see him monopolized by Coombs' whims made them seethe with resentment. Go on, boy. When their laughter subsided, Hollard stepped forward, clapped a heavy hand on Lance's shoulder, then nodded to one of his men. You, ride go with him. The king is the count's most precious guest. Not a hair on his head must come to harm. Yes, sire. The soldier moved to join Lance, and inwardly Lance cursed. Leeches. Always clinging, never letting go. Still, he gave no sign, only tugged at Aerys' chains and led him forward. They had taken scarcely 3 steps when Hollard's voice cracked like a whip behind them. Stop! Lance froze. His heart lurched. Slowly, he turned, face schooled into puzzlement. Sir Simon stood with his sword bared, point levelled at Lance's chest. His voice was sharp with suspicion. Why does your tunic not fit you? The words hung in the air like ice. At once the other soldiers turned to look. In the torchlight, it was plain Lance's frame was broad, yet the sleeves ended too high, the trousers too short. Earlier, the distance and shadows had hidden it. Now there was no mistaking it. Steel rasped from scabbards as 2 soldiers advanced, weapons ready. The third raised his crossbow once more, bolt trained between Lance's ribs. Damn it! He had planned to slip away, dispatch the escort when the chance arose. But the game had collapsed in an instant. Jaw clenched, Lance met Hollard's gaze, the knight scarcely a pace behind him now. Then, without hesitation, he reached into the void. And crushed the priceless SS tier experience card. Boom! Chapter 7, Chapter 7 Sir Barristan Selmy. Chapter 7 Sir Barristan Selmy. SS rank experience card Barristan Selmy. When activated, grants the full might of Barristan Selmy in his prime for 30 minutes. Countdown, 29:59. Character Profile, Barristan the Bold, the indomitable knight who claimed the tourney crown at the age of 57. Passive ability, while fighting for the rightful ruler of the Iron Throne, gain plus 100% courage. Oath, with my body, I shall defend the honor of the Iron Throne unto death. The crisp sound of shattering glass echoed in Lance's mind. In an instant, a flood of alien muscle memory surged through his veins like boiling water, filling every fiber of his body with overwhelming power. Simon Hollard was only a step away. Lance's lips peeled back in a grin. His hand shot to the hilt, and with lightning speed he drew his sword and struck. Aerys had once said this man was no common knight, that even Sir Gawain Gaunt had fallen before his blade. With only 30% Synctical Drogo's template, Lance knew victory would have been impossible. But now? Now he wielded the courage and skill of Barristan the Bold. Dash! Simon, for his part, had been watching carefully. The moment Lance lunged, he brought up his sword to meet him. As master-at-arms of Dun Fort, his skill was renowned. Around Duskendale, he had never met an equal. He'd fought in tourneys, measured his blade against the best save perhaps Sir Arthur Dane and Barristan Selmy himself. He believed no Kingsguard alive could match him. Had he not humbled Gwaine Gaunt himself, half a year ago? So when he saw lances swing, his heart held no fear. Unless this fool truly carries Barristan within him, or Dane's dawn blade flows in his veins, he will fall. Besides, Simon had 3 men at his back. Even Barristan would think twice before charging into those odds. The swords met with a shriek of steel. Simon smirked. The boy was slower than Gaunt had been, clumsy even. So this is your strength? To dream of rescuing a king? Foolish child. But then his smile froze. Lance's wrist flicked, impossibly subtle. Simon's own blade twisted in his grip, dragged offline by a force he couldn't resist. His eyes widened as his sword, betraying him, plunged into the chest of his own comrade. The soldier staggered, crimson spilling from his lips as he stared down in disbelief at the steel jutting from his chest. Simon gasped, but there was no time for shock. A knee slammed into the weak gap of his armor, right beneath the breastplate. Agony exploded through him, and he stumbled back, his sword slipping from numb fingers. Before he could recover, Lance snatched the fallen weapon, spun, and hammered its pommel into another soldier's temple. Bone cracked. The man dropped like a sack of grain. The third soldier had finally cocked his crossbow only to level it at Aerys. Too late. Lance's shoulder slammed into the collapsing body at his side, hurling it into the line of fire. The quarrel thudded home into the hapless man's back, saving the Mad King by a hair's breadth. 3 men down in a heartbeat. But Simon Hollard wasn't finished. Gasping, he tore a dagger from his leg armor and drove it straight toward Lance's eye. It was a killing thrust, swift, precise, inevitable. No knight alive could twist away in time. Except Lance was no longer merely Lance. Every muscle in his body thrummed with exhilaration. Death itself sharpened his senses to a fever pitch. At the last instant, he snapped his head aside, the blade kissed past his eye and his jaws clamped down on cold steel. Crunch! The edge tore into his mouth, splitting his lip, flooding his tongue with the copper tang of blood. But he held it fast. Simon's arm wrenched, trapped. A boot like a warhammer slammed into his chest. His breastplate caved inward with a sickening crunch. Breath and strength fled him, his vision swimming black. He collapsed in a heap, gasping like a fish. The last soldier shrieked and broke, sprinting for his life. Lance spat the dagger free, the taste of blood sweet and wild in his mouth. With one smooth motion, he hurled the blade. It whistled through the air, thunk, burying itself clean through the fleeing man's neck. The body crashed to the ground. In less than 10 seconds, Lance had slaughtered 3 men and broken another. Simon, clutching his ruined chest, wheezed in disbelief. This is impossible. My ribs 5, at least shattered. Simon Hollard lifted his gaze. Through the flickering firelight, he saw Lance striding toward him, both hands gripping swords. And for a heartbeat, he saw not Lance, but him. That white-cloaked knight who had humiliated him once before in a tourney. The precision, the unyielding pressure, that fearless momentum. It was the same. Exactly the same. B.A. Barristan Selmy. The name tore from Simon's lips. He stared at Lance in disbelief, only to be met with a stranger's face, made ghostly by the glow of flames. Lance only chuckled, crouching low before him. From inside his blood-stained armor, he drew out a filthy, torn cloak, its original pure white just barely recognizable beneath the gore. He dropped it across Simon's chest. "My name is Lancelot," he said evenly, "sworn brother of the Kingsguard to his grace, Aerys II Targaryen." His eyes narrowed. "You should remember that cloak. It once belonged to Sir Gwaine Gaunt, my predecessor." I Simon's gaze sank to the ruined white cloth across his chest. His lips trembled. He wanted to yield, to croak out an apology. "I'm sorry." But the words stuck in his throat, strangled by pride and fear. "There's no need for apologies." Lance seemed to read his heart. Shaking his head, he smiled faintly. "Every man chooses his own fate. Sir Gawain chose to die protecting his king. That was his duty as a Kingsguard. He kept his oath to the very end, an excellent knight." For an instant, Simon felt a sliver of relief. Then steel flashed. The sword point drove straight through the cloak, straight through his chest. Ghhhh. Simon's throat clogged with blood. His eyes bulged wide, staring at Lance in agony, unable even to scream. "You too are an excellent knight," Simon hollered. The words fell cold and flat in his ears, as his vision dimmed. To die in single combat, surely that is the best end a knight could wish for. Lance released the hilt, leaving the sword trembling in its master's body, and walked away without looking back. The proud master-at-arms of Dunfort sagged against the wall, his lifeless eyes fixed on the ceiling, his hands clutching tight at the white cloak pressed against his wound, staining it deeper red. Dash. When Lance reached Aerys, he found the king staring at him, purple eyes bloodshot, burning with a feverish light. "What?" Lance frowned. "I am the true dragon." Aerys hissed suddenly, eyes unblinking, his voice manic with conviction. Lance froze, utterly dumbfounded. The king staggered closer, laying trembling hands on Lance's arm and shoulder, stroking as if handling some priceless relic. His lips moved ceaselessly, whispering, "Yes, yes." Only a true dragon could choose at random, and yet grant such power beyond even the Kingsguard. "I, Aerys II Targaryen, I am the true dragon." Confidence no, arrogance blazed off him like wildfire. Lance rolled his eyes. "Yeah, sure. If not for that SS rank experience card, both of us would already be corpses. But now this lunatic thinks it's all because he's some true dragon? What was this? The Targaryen takes MVP, and Lancelot is just the carry mule? Look into my eyes. Enough. Let's go, Your Grace." Lance flicked his wrist, twin sword flowers spinning, shearing clean through the king's shackles. The system clock ticked in his vision, 26 minutes, 43 seconds remaining. Too much noise just now. They'll be swarming this place soon. Without waiting for an answer, he slung the Mad King over his shoulder and broke into a sprint toward the gate. Chapter 8, The Tumult of Duskendale. Chapter 8, The Tumult of Duskendale. The Dun Fort. Dennis Darkland sat slumped in his wide chair, his gaze fixed on the corpses laid before him, eyes heavy with exhaustion. In the center of the hall, a woman in heavy paint and silks knelt weeping over the body of Coombs. Her wails filled the chamber, drowning the air in sorrow. "Enough!" At last, Dennis's deep voice broke the silence. But the woman did not heed him. Her sobs only grew louder, shriller, stabbing at his ears. "I said." His tone sharpened, laced with impatience. "Stop crying." The command, barked like a lash, finally cut through. Her loud wails dwindled to soft whimpers. Red-rimmed eyes lifted, fixing on him with a gaze heavy with grief, and something darker. Resentment. Dennis sighed. He rubbed his temples, weariness dragging at his shoulders. He had inherited his title as naturally as breathing, the firstborn of House Darkland. He liked to think himself a capable lord. Under his governance, Duskendale prospered, its harbour fat with trade, its people better fed than most of Westeros. He should have lived as his father had, ruling steadily, aging with dignity, passing his title to the next heir. But somewhere along the road, all his good cards had turned to ash in his hands. When had it begun? Perhaps the moment he met her, Cyrilla, the woman from across the narrow sea. Despite every warning, despite his family's protest, he'd defied them all and married her. My Coombs, my poor brother. Cyrilla suddenly flung herself into his arms, sobbing hotly against his chest. He crossed the sea with me. We siblings had only each other, and now he's gone. Her tears turned to accusation. You must avenge him, Dennis. You're the Lord of Duskendale. This is your city. None dare defy you here. None. But Dennis's eyes had already drifted past her, to the still corpse of Sir Simon Hollard. A bitter snort escaped his nose. It had been the same arguments, the same pleading, that led him astray in the first place. Cyrilla's urging had swayed him to defy the crown. When the king himself rode into Duskendale, it was her whispering that steeled his resolve to imprison Aerys. Without her, none of this would have come to pass. Sir Simon, loyal to House Darklyn all his life, would not have met his death. Cyrilla. He meant to lash out, to scold her, to spit the truth. But when he met her tear-drenched eyes, all his anger dissolved. Once again, his heart weakened. Another sigh. He tapped his brow with a knuckle, as though to drive away the throbbing ache behind his eyes. "My lord." The voice was steady, carrying a calm authority. Dennis looked up as a tall figure strode into the hall. The man bowed slightly. John Hollard, his steward and distant kin to Simon. "Any word of the king?" Dennis blurted, shoving Cyrilla aside as he rose from his chair, anxiety thick in his tone. John shook his head. "No. But he is still within the walls. Many claim to have seen him, some even fought him. Yet he escapes still. His grace is not alone. There is a knight with him. A dangerous one. I sent men to bar their path, but most were cut down. Those who survived swore the knight carried the king upon his shoulders, all while carving a trail through our streets." His eyes narrowed. "Even so, they are but 2 men. They slip past because their trail is narrow. Our forces must spread out to seek them." Dennis's face drained of color. He knew full well the treason he had committed. If the king slipped free of the city, he would lose his only bargaining chip with Tywin Lannister. And then, death was all that awaited him. "Calm yourself, my lord." John's voice was soothing, steady. "There is but one way in and out of Duskendale, the gate. I have stationed Sir Robin with 50 men there. No matter how skilled he is, the knight will never break through." Dennis sagged with relief, sinking back into his chair. Good, good. How far had he fallen? The once proud lord of Duskendale now quaked like a man with no will of his own. "You should rest," John continued, voice measured. "See to Lady Asha. She misses you." Dennis blinked, softening. Asha, his sister. 5 years wed to John. That bond was why Dennis trusted him above all others. "You're right, she told me it has been weeks since you last came home. She longs to see you." John bowed slightly, polite as ever. "Not yet, my lord. Not until I have avenged Sir Coombs and Sir Simon. Then I will return to her." "You have my gratitude, John." Dennis managed a faint smile. "Without you, Duskendale would already be in chaos. Serving House Darklyn is my honor." John bowed again. When Dennis leaned back, eyes closing in weary reprieve, John turned crisply to leave. Yet just before crossing the threshold, his head angled back subtle, almost hidden. His eyes lingered on Cyrilla. His tongue flicked across his lips. And he smiled a lewd, hungry grin. Cyrilla, instead of getting angry, suddenly burst into laughter through her tears and blew him a silent kiss. "Damn it!" In the narrow alley, Lance drove his sword through another pursuer's throat. The cries of killing echoed from all directions, making him curse under his breath. "These bastards stick to me like tar. Kill a batch, and another shows up right after." He hadn't bothered to count, but Lance figured he had already cut down at least a dozen men. If not for the Baristan experience card, SS rank, even with the physical boost granted by his 30% fusion with Khal Drogo, he would have collapsed long ago. But right now, Lance wasn't exactly doing well either. His whole body was covered in blood and grime, wounds ran across both his arm and thigh, and the Baristan buff had less than 8 minutes left. A wave of panic stirred in his chest. If it was already this hard with the card's support, then once the Westerosian Baristan the bolt expired, how the hell was he supposed to break through with just Khal Drogo's measly 30% stat boost? And to make matters worse, the lunatic on his shoulder King Aerys was having another attack. Heh. I am the true dragon. I shall ride the Black Death and burn every last traitor into charred bone and roasted flesh. I will be the King of Ashes. Burn. Burn them all. Shut the hell up. Driven mad by Aerys' ravings, Lance smacked his scrawny thigh and barked. Keep screeching and you'll bring the pursuers right to us. And when they catch up, I swear Dennis Darklyn will turn your royal ass into a pincushion. You know Coombs is tight with that freak. Darklyn's definitely one of those backdoor-loving perverts. Maybe it was Lance's furious scolding, maybe the Mad King had just worn himself out, but Aerys finally fell silent. Hearing nothing behind him, Lance let out a long sigh of relief. Still, as the seconds ticked away, his eyes kept darting toward the city gate, his mind racing. Damn it! Why only give me an SS rank card? If it had been an SSR, whether the Lightbringer Azor Ahai or the Perfect Knight Galadon Hell, anyone from the heroic age. Just one of those, and I'd be dragging Aerys while cutting this whole damn city into pieces. Instead, here I am, scurrying around like a headless fly. Fuck. Lance grit his teeth, spat another curse, then hoisted Aerys tighter onto his shoulder and made for the city gate. Time was almost up. No matter how dangerous that gate was, he had no choice but to risk it. If the pursuers dragged them back, Lance wasn't sure what fate awaited the king, but for himself, death was certain. Gwaine Gaunt's bloody example was still fresh in everyone's memory. Man's gotta risk it once before he dies. With that final resolve burning in him, Lance sprinted toward the gate. But just as he turned out of the alley, a figure suddenly stepped into his path. Die! Reacting purely on instinct, Lance swung his blade down at the newcomer. But the man was fast. He twisted aside and dodged with startling agility. Lance was about to launch a second strike when the stranger barked back in a low growl. Stop! I'm here to save the king. Chapter 9, Chapter 9 Burn them all. Chapter 9 Burn them all. Reinforcements. At the shout, Lance froze mid-swing, though his sword remained raised as he eyed the newcomer with suspicion. The man looked to be in his 30s, with wavy black hair and a thick beard that gave him a rugged air. Yet the way he held himself straight-backed, composed, spoke more of a noble than a sellsword. And why the hell should I trust you? Lance growled, blade held crosswise before him. The man showed no irritation. Instead, he reached into his coat, pulled something free, and tossed it over. Catching it on the flat of his sword, Lance squinted. It was a crest blue field, white cross, and 2 black war hammers crossed at the center. But while the man waited expectantly, Lance just shook his head and said bluntly. Never seen it. Don't know what house that's from. Shit. The man's smile froze. He almost swore aloud, but seeing Lance's utterly shameless "I may be ignorant but I'm very confident about it" look, he swallowed it back and forced himself to explain. My name is Rivera Ricker, boy. Never heard of you. Lance kept shaking his head. The reply landed like a stone in Rivera's gut. 7 hells, how did someone who clearly never studied heraldry end up with sword skills like this? Shooting Lance a glare, Rivera muttered, all you need to know is I'm here to help. Oi, old man. Ignoring him, Lance patted the slumped figure on his shoulder. You know this guy? But Aerys didn't answer. Adjusting him slightly, Lance realized the king had at some point fallen asleep. Unbelievable, what nerves on this one. Seeing that, Lance sighed and lowered his blade. If this man were truly an enemy, he'd have already called the guards down on them instead of wasting time here. Follow me, kid, Rivera said curtly. He wasn't thrilled by Lance's attitude, but he knew now wasn't the time to argue. Without waiting, he turned and headed deeper into the alley. After a moment's thought, Lance shifted Aerys' weight on his shoulder and followed. Dash! Damn it, where are they? Outside Duskendale, Barry Stan stood in the shadow of a crumbling wall, growing more anxious by the minute. His hair was matted, his white cloak long stained with grime. Nothing remained of the proud, gleaming Kingsguard. He looked more like a common sellsword than a knight of legend. The appointed time had passed more than half an hour ago, and still not a soul had appeared. This section of the town wall was the lowest, but even so it rose 5 or 6 meters. Without help from the inside, climbing it barehanded was near impossible. Worst of all, only moments earlier, he had heard faint shouting and clashing steel from within the town. 7 above, please let that have nothing to do with the king. At last, his patience snapped. Barry Stan looked up at the sheer stone, found what tiny cracks and edges he could, and began clawing his way upward. Dash! At Duskendale's east gate, the portcullis loomed. Robin Hollard kicked the winch chain, the rusted metal groaning under the strain. To either side of him, 50 spearmen stood ready, while 20 archers watched from the walls. With this much steel bristling at the gate, Robin thought grimly, not even a fly would escape the town. Just then, a small caravan of 4 wagons creaked toward the gate. Stop! Robin barked the order, spurring his horse forward to block their path. At the sight of the soldiers massed around the gate, Rivera Ricker frowned briefly. But the moment he recognized who was in charge, he forced a sly smile onto his face and rode up with a friendly greeting. Robin? Why you today, and not John? My uncle ordered me to guard the gate, the boy answered bluntly. Only 17, Robin Hollard was tall, broad-shouldered, but with little subtlety in his manner. He spoke with the straightforward authority of someone simply parroting orders. By command, no one is allowed to leave Duskendale today. Best turn back, Lord Ricker. Rivera didn't bristle at the tone. Stroking his beard, his expression turned disarmingly mild. Then, with the smallest gesture, he produced a leather pouch and raised his brows ever so slightly. Of course, I understand the rules. He gave the bag a light shake. 120 gold dragons, exactly half the profit from this trip. Robin's eyes locked on the pouch in Rivera's hand, Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. This isn't about money. He hesitated, but after a moment he shook his head firmly. Uncle John's orders were clear: no one leaves the city. Go back, my lord. Business can wait. Today, it cannot. Rivera's smile stiffened, a flicker of irritation breaking through. He forced a sigh, feigning bafflement. And what exactly is going on today? His voice hardened, carrying for the soldiers behind Robin to hear. You know as well as I do we're nearly out of food. If this shipment doesn't make it out, if we don't trade it for grain, you and I will be chewing fence posts like the peasants. The words had their effect. At the mention of food, the rank-and-file soldiers glanced toward Robin, hunger burning in their eyes. Ever since the siege began, most of them had been starving, surviving on scraps. Without Rivera's smuggling routes, many would already be dead. Feeling their stares bore into him, Robin's resolve wavered. He exhaled through his nose. Fine. Check them. At his order, several soldiers stepped forward. Under Robin's watchful gaze, they jabbed spear points into the canvas covers of each wagon. No problem, sire. Just barrels of wine. Robin's brow furrowed. Their cursory inspection wasn't enough. Urging his horse closer, he leaned down and rapped his bronze gauntlet against each barrel. Thump! Thump! The dull resonance confirmed they were indeed filled with wine, or something that sounded like it. Rivera felt sweat prick his palms. By the third wagon his pulse was racing. The fourth wagon, the one with the king hidden inside. Robin strode toward it. 7 Save me! But whether from boredom or fatigue, Robin only tapped the barrels lining the edges and ignored the one buried in the middle. Satisfied, he turned away. Rivera nearly collapsed in relief, a thin sheen of sweat glistening on his brow. Let them through! Robin commanded, gesturing broadly. The chain screeched as the portcullis rattled upward, opening just enough to let the wagons pass. Rivera quickly urged the drivers forward, eager to escape before fortune turned. Wait! The word stopped him cold. Rivera's heart seized. He forced a shaky smile, turning back. Yes. Robin rode up, smiling in turn, and extended an open palm. The gold dragons! Ah, of course, of course. Rivera fumbled, then smoothly pulled the pouch from his coat and placed it in Robin's hand. Robin hefted it, nodded in satisfaction, and grinned. Good luck, my lord. Your kindness, as always, Rivera replied with a shallow bow, relief flooding him as the wagons creaked forward again. But just as the convoy began to pass the ring of soldiers, a harsh, rasping voice suddenly rang out from inside one of the barrels. Burn! Burn them all! Rivera's blood ran cold. His heart leapt to his throat as every soldier's head snapped toward the wagons. Burn them all! Chapter 10, Chapter 10 The Tiger General. Chapter 10 The Tiger General. Burn! Burn them all! Ah ha ha ha! The muffled shouts rang clear from inside the barrel, freezing everyone in place. Rivera stiffened as though struck by lightning. Forcing a grin, he shot Robin an awkward smile. 7 hells! I should have gagged the king while I had the chance. Why did he have to wake up now, of all times? Stand ready! Robin's eyes blazed. With a barked order, 50 spears leveled at Rivera and the 4 wagons. You disappoint me, my lord. Robin did not strike immediately. Instead, he urged his horse forward, passing by Rivera with a low growl. Even if the Viscount had smuggled the king, Robin couldn't simply cut him down here. The Duskendale lords might hold the strongest cards in town, but they weren't the only players. Not even Sir Dennis Darkland himself would dare casually execute a member of House Ricker. I can explain. Rivera began, desperate to protest that the king had snuck aboard without his knowledge. But Robin gave him no chance. The voice from the barrels grew louder as Robin approached. With a sneer, he wrenched the lid aside. And there was King Aerys, filthy, wild-eyed, spewing curses. Well, your grace, Robin mocked, grinning wide, you look quite lively. At the sound, Aerys raised his head. His clouded violet eyes burned suddenly bright with recognition. You! I remember you! With a burst of manic strength, the frail old king lunged, clawing onto Robin's neck. The young knight reeled, caught utterly off guard as the withered monarch clung to him like a mad dog. I remember you! I remember! You danced before me, you dared to tug the dragon's beard. You'll burn! You and your traitor lord both! Fire will reduce you to ash! Aerys shrieked and yanked at Robin's hair, frothing with rage. The towering Hollard staggered, unable to shake him loose, his horse stamping but miraculously holding steady. The watching soldiers didn't dare intervene. Instead, many stifled laughter behind their shields. To see their king flailing like a fishwife, such a spectacle might only come once in a lifetime. Enough! Robin's strength finally told. He clamped a hand around Aerys's throat, squeezing until the king's face flushed scarlet and his limbs weakened. Rivera winced, torn between stepping forward and the spears that barred his way. Dragon, is it? Robin snarled, dragging the wheezing king closer. Spittle flew as he mocked. Dragons have been dead for over a century, you wretched cur. Dragon blood? Fire and blood? Bah! He spat full in Aerys's face. Show me your fangs, dragon! Bite through my throat if you dare! He leaned closer, daring the monarch, howling with laughter. But Aerys only gagged, eyes rolling back. Rhaegar's jaw tightened. To see a Targaryen so debased was more than he could stomach. His hand drifted to the hilt at his side. Thud. The sound of a body hitting stone cracked through the tension. All turned to see a Darkland soldier's corpse sprawled at the base of the wall. Then shouts, steel, the clash of battle from atop the ramparts. Robin's brow furrowed, about to send men to investigate, when... crack! The top of a nearby barrel exploded. Wine and wood shards sprayed like shrapnel as a figure burst free, drenched crimson. A flash of steel swift, precise. Before Robin could react, a sword point drove cleanly into the gap between gorget and breastplate. Blood sprayed as his eyes went wide. For a heartbeat, silence. Then chaos. Only Rhaegar's eyes gleamed with fierce excitement. Lance kicked free of the shattered barrel, boots slamming into Robin's chest and knocking him from the saddle. With his free arm, he seized the half-conscious king, laying him flat across the horse's back. Seven hells, I almost drowned in there. Lance spat, gasping. 2 full minutes he had held himself under, submerged in sour wine, just to spring the trap. The spell broke. Soldiers shouted, steel rang. Spears leveled once more as both sides scrambled to react. Staring at the dense wall of spears before him, Lance's eyes narrowed. On his retinal display, the countdown for the Barristan experience card flickered. Only 2 minutes remained. With a sharp smack, he slapped Aerys across the forehead. He didn't bother blaming the old man for losing his mind at such a critical moment. Instead, his gaze shifted toward the city gate, where a small gap had been forced open. His voice was calm, almost casual. Time to move, old man. Hat. Aerys giggled madly, mumbling like a lunatic, burn them all. Burn. Lance grinned, then spurred his horse with a fierce shout. Flames are nothing compared to the thrill of steel. Yah! The warhorse screamed and thundered forward. Just as its head was about to collide with the forest of spear points, Lance yanked hard on the reins. The beast reared high, front hooves slamming down with crushing force. 2 soldiers beneath were instantly sent flying, their iron breastplates crumpling like paper. At the same moment, at least 3 spears stabbed deep into the horse. One glanced dangerously close, slicing across Lance's thigh and carving a gash nearly to the bone. But instead of fear, the critical danger only sent a rush of exhilaration flooding through him. His body burned with adrenaline. He couldn't even feel the pain. Passive, while fighting for the rightful king of the Iron Throne, gain plus 100% courage. With a sudden motion, Lance tossed aside his sword and snatched a spear straight out of the enemy's hands. Empowered by the Barristan card, his strength was overwhelming. The soldier had no chance of resisting. The instant the weapon settled into his grip, a tide of instinct surged through his body. His muscles moved with flawless familiarity, as though he had spent years mastering the spear. Several more soldiers pressed in. Lance lowered the shaft, the wooden tip scraping the packed earth before exploding upward in a lightning-quick thrust. Each strike landed with deadly precision, piercing throats, thighs, and vital points in rapid succession. Then, with a spin, he swept the shaft sideways. The iron-capped butt smashed into 3 men's knees, the sickening crack of shattering bone ringing out. Within mere seconds, the 8 soldiers of the vanguard were all writhing on the ground, crippled or dying. The display of ferocity froze the others where they stood, terror etched across every face. Ha! Ha ha ha! Seeing them hesitate, Lance raised the spear and roared with manic laughter. The gleam of the spear point cut across their frightened expressions, and his voice bellowed like a wild beast. Come on then, pups of Duskendale. I'm just getting started. Chapter 11, Chapter 11 Breakout from Duskendale. Chapter 11 Breakout from Duskendale. On the battlements. Sir Barristan Selmy's blade flashed again and again, each strike clean, each strike deadly. Heads rolled at his feet, yet his heart was heavy. He felt no pride in his display of skill, because no one had followed him up the wall. The moment he scaled the battlements, the defenders spotted him, forcing Barristan to fight alone. With no other choice, he cut his way through, even hewing one soldier clean off the wall. This time he had come in disguise, with no gleaming armor to shield him, just a thin breastplate strapped beneath his plain clothes. 7 hells! He muttered, pressing his back against the stonework. The narrow walkway left him no room to maneuver. He hefted the corpse of a fallen foe, holding it before him as a crude shield against the archer's arrows. The king was nowhere in sight. Instead, he had blundered into danger himself. The thought soured his mood, though at least his ferocity kept the enemy wary. They hesitated, unwilling to press too close, a silent standoff stretching across the wall. As Barristan weighed his options, a roar of battle erupted from below, drawing his gaze through the crenellations. There, charging straight into a mass of spearmen, was a lone warrior on horseback. At first Barristan expected the fool to be skewered within moments. Yet to his shock, the rider twisted fate itself, ripping weapons from his foes, felling men with ruthless precision, scattering soldiers as though they were children. "Come on then, pups of Duskendale. I'm just getting started." The warrior's voice rang so clear, so fierce, that even Barristan felt his chest tighten. That reckless courage, it stirred memories of the Battle of the Ninepenny Kings, when he himself had cut his way through the Golden Company and, against all odds, struck down the last Blackfire Malleus the Monstrous. No, Barristan thought, this rider was facing something even worse. A battlefield drowned in chaos, and yet he truly stood alone against dozens. By the 7. I thought my own deeds were unmatched. But this man, who is he? Then Barristan's sharp eyes caught something that made him freeze. The rider's horse bore not just its master, but another figure slung across its back. That long silver hair matted, filthy, yet unmistakable. That tattered black robe familiar even through the grime. The king. Dash. Below the wall. At Lance's roar, the formation of spearmen faltered. Dozens of soldiers stood rooted, weapons shaking in their hands, unwilling to take a single step forward. They could only block the gate, hoping their presence alone might intimidate this knight who seemed less a man than a force of nature. Pathetic. Lance spat blood, feeling the sting of a blow he hadn't even noticed in the frenzy. His cheek throbbed, his body burned, and on his inner display the timer ticked mercilessly downward. 1 minute, 13 seconds. He lowered his cracked spear once more, leveling it parallel with the earth. Beneath him, his warhorse pawed the ground, nostrils flaring hot breath, its hide streaked with blood yet its spirit surging with battle lust. This fire, this thrill, it had never felt such power under Robin Hollard's hand. "You feel it too, don't you?" Lance murmured, brushing its mane with a blood-stained hand. Then, with a grin, "Success or failure, this will be our last charge." Hi-ah! With a thunderous cry, he drove his heels into the horse's flanks. And so, before the eyes of all, the lone knight hurled himself once more against an army that outnumbered him 50 to 1. The sight alone made hardened men quail, knees buckling as dread clawed their hearts. "Make way! Lancelot!" A voice roared from behind Rivera's desperate shout. Lance glanced back just in time to see 3 enormous wine barrels hurtling across the ground, rolling at deadly speed. He wrenched the reins, swinging his horse aside at the very last instant, narrowly escaping the crushing impact. The barrels rolled down the cobbled road, bumping to a stop before the enemy ranks. They didn't smash into soldiers, didn't bowl anyone over, just lay there, spent of momentum. But Lance's nostrils flared. Not wine. Something sharper. Harsher. Pitch oil. His eyes snapped toward the barrels. They had been cracked open, their contents already spilling across the stones in a dark, glistening trail, an elegant arc of liquid fire waiting for a spark. "Oi, old man!" Lance slapped Aerys on the back, his lips twisting into a mad grin. You've always wanted to burn them, haven't you? Well, let's give them fire. He rammed his spear against the paving stones, steel grinding stone with a scream. Sparks burst, leaping eagerly into the oil. Flames bloomed. They raced along the trail in a ravenous rush, lapping at boots and greaves. In an instant, the front line of spearmen were engulfed, shrieking as fire devoured leather, flesh, and bone. Above the inferno, Aerys writhed in the saddle, clapping and gnashing at his own robes with blackened teeth, shrieking with manic joy. Ha ha ha! Burn them! Burn them all! Reduce them to ash! I am the King of Ashes! The firestorm tore the enemy formation in two, leaving a blazing corridor down the center. On Lance's inner display, the timer flashed crimson, 12:23. He tore a strip of cloth from his shoulder, tying it across his mouth and nose. Then, leaning low over the saddle, he whispered so only Aerys could hear. They say true dragons don't fear fire. Isn't that right, old man? Woohoo! Ah! Aerys's pupils shrank with fevered delight, as if he understood. A keening shriek burst from his throat, and he clutched the horse's mane like reins of a dragon, staring into the flames as though commanding them. Here we go! Lance wrenched the reins. The warhorse, half mad with terror and bloodlust, surged forward, its hooves striking sparks as it plunged into the corridor of fire. Its mane brushed the tongues of flame and ignited, burning away in a brilliant arc. Spearmen who had survived the fire thrust their lances forward in desperation. Lance lowered his own weapon, dragging the spear point across the ground. Heat seared the steel until it glowed ember red. At the final instant, he heaved it up, each thrust a blazing comet driving into exposed throats. Soldiers dropped, choking and burning, as Aerys threw back his head and screamed a single word that tore the night apart. Dracarys! He clutched the flaming mane, molten hair and fat dripping down between his fingers, blistering flesh, and he laughed, blind to the pain. But fate itself rebelled. The wooden winch of the portcullis cracked in the heat. With a groaning snap, the great bronze gate came crashing down. No! From behind, Rivera bellowed in horror, eyes wide as the gate plummeted. In that heartbeat, Lance seized his spear in both hands. Every muscle bulged beneath firelight as he hurled it with all his strength. The shaft jammed into the mechanism, wedging against the bronze. The falling gate shuddered, arrested for the barest instant. It was enough. The warhorse thundered forward, a gale of fire in its wake like the wings of a dragon. With the Mad King slung across its back, Lance burst through the flames, slipping past the gate at the very moment it slammed shut with a deafening crash. And as they tore out of Duskendale, the timer before his eyes ticked down to nothing. 0. Chapter 12, Chapter 12 The Council Before the King. Chapter 12 The Council Before the King. Inside the royal army's command tent. Covered in blood and dust, Sir Barristan Selmy stepped through the flap, only to see his king seated safely upon the high chair. On either side of Aerys, the members of the small council were all present, yet none dared sit within 3 or 4 paces of him. The only figure permitted so close was a tall, imposing man standing by the king's side. Your Grace! Barristan exhaled in relief. Planting his sword into the ground, he dropped to one knee before Aerys. He himself had barely escaped death not long ago. Aerys gave him a passing glance and spoke in a cool, even tone. I have heard of your deeds, Ser. To ride alone into Duskendale, such courage shames every knight of my Kingsguard. At least, compared to some others. You flatter me, your Grace. I truly did little to aid you. Though the king's praise warmed his heart, Barristan answered with honesty. Your deliverance owed far more to this formidable warrior at your side. Indeed. Aerys inclined his head, turning toward Lance with a faint smile of satisfaction. The man who had carved their way to freedom stood tall and silent, chest out, face expressionless, the very picture of a bodyguard born. He understood his purpose well, to lend the king an aura of strength and intimidation. 6 months of captivity had changed many things. Who could say what loyalty still remained within the small council? And above all, Tywin Lannister. With a gesture for Barry Stan to step aside, Aerys raised his voice, calling out for his hand. "My dearest hand, where are you hiding?" At the summons, Tywin Lannister rose slightly from his seat and inclined his head with icy composure. "Your Grace." He wore a crimson silk robe embroidered in gold thread with fierce lions. His face betrayed no emotion, yet his tone was courtly, impeccably measured, as he acknowledged his king. All eyes in the tent turned toward the two men nominally the most powerful in the Seven Kingdoms, listening with sharpened ears for what would follow. Only Ser Barristan's gaze strayed. He stole wary glances at Lance, fingers tightening on the hilt of his sword. For the Kingsguard to be absent from the king's side, replaced by this stranger, stirred in him a deep unease. Kneel. Or do you mean to sit there and answer your king from a chair? The words cut like a lash. Instead of addressing the matter of Duskendale, Aerys turned on his hand with sudden fury, chastising him before the full council. Shock rippled through the chamber. Some eyes gleamed with amusement, others with fear or disbelief. None had expected that the king's very first act upon his return would be to humiliate Tywin Lannister. Under their collective gaze, Tywin's eyes narrowed. He cast his gaze slowly about the chamber, meeting each councillor's stare in turn. From those cold depths radiated the commanding weight of a lion. Even Lord Lucerys Velaryon, the master of ships, who had moments earlier worn a smirk of schadenfreude, let it fade under the silent weight of Tywin's warning gaze. After nearly 10 seconds of tense stillness, Tywin finally rose. He stepped forward with deliberate calm, came to stand before Aerys, and sank to one knee. His emerald eyes, unflinching, locked on the king's as he spoke in a low, resonant voice. "The king commands me to kneel, and so the hand obeys without question. But as your friend, I cannot help but recall the days of the 9 Penny Kings when we fought side by side in glory. If memory serves, it was I who first dubbed you knight." At that, even Lance flicked him a glance of surprise. None could deny it, this Duke of Casterly Rock was a man of rare steel. To speak so bluntly before the court, and to the king himself, was audacious beyond measure. His words were veiled, yet no one present was foolish enough to miss their meaning. "As the hand, I kneel to my king. But as the one who once knighted you, should not Aerys Targaryen also kneel to Tywin Lannister?" Only moments ago, Lance had thought Aerys' insistence on keeping him close a needless precaution. After all, even absent for half a year, a king ought not be overshadowed in his own council. But now, he saw the truth. Tywin Lannister's power loomed dangerously close to eclipsing the throne itself. To defy the king so brazenly, Barristan's blood boiled at the insult. His hand tightened on the hilt of his sword, teeth clenched, but he held his tongue. A Kingsguard had no voice in matters of council. Even Sir Gerald Hightower, the famed White Bull and Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, kept his silence. Tywin's rebuttal, after all, had been only in metaphor. Ha, ha, ha. Aerys' bony fingers dug into the arms of his chair, knuckles whitening. Tywin's piercing stare seemed to unmoor him. His lips curled, his violet eyes bloodshot and wild, madness flickering once more. "Your Grace!" Lance raised his voice sharply, fearful the king might erupt in one of his infamous fits, screaming for fire, demanding them all burned alive. The sound snapped Aerys back. His eyes cleared, his breath came hard and fast, and after a long, ragged exhale he forced down his rage. At last, he fixed his gaze on Tywin, now risen, tall and unbending in the center of the tent. Instead of fury, a harsh laugh grated from the king's throat, mocking and bitter. "I must thank you, Lord Hand. In my absence, you bore the weight of rule. How diligent you've been!" "That was my duty, Your Grace," Tywin replied evenly, without bowing too low or standing too tall. "Indeed." Aerys tapped a skeletal finger against the chair, lips twisting into a ghastly smile. For what am I, after all, but a puppet on the Iron Throne? And the true ruler of the Seven Kingdoms, is my hand of the King Tywin Lannister. A collective gasp swept the council. Even Tywin's composure cracked, his brows knit, and his voice grew firm. Your Grace, how could such a thought enter your mind? Everything I have done has been to strengthen the Targaryen reign. Never have I sought to usurp what is yours. The denial, though controlled, carried a rare urgency. Even Tywin Lannister could not ignore the peril of such an accusation. Ha, ha ha. Aerys' laughter returned, raw and jagged. His tongue darted over dry lips, a string of spittle stretching between them, gleaming red in the firelight like the maw of a beast about to bite. Then, suddenly, his gaze shifted beyond Tywin, settling on a tall, thin knight standing rigid in armor behind him. I believe you, Lord Tywin, the king rasped. I believe you mean no such treason. But can you swear that those beneath you have not spoken otherwise? The knight jolted at the words. Aerys did not release him. His voice, slow and venomous, carried across the tent. To speak of the king and the hand in whispers, to spread such venomous lies, what punishment should that merit, I wonder? His purple eyes gleamed as his lips curled into a smile. Sir Ilan Payne. Chapter 13, Chapter 13 The Execution. Chapter 13 The Execution. The moment Aerys called his name aloud, every eye in the council chamber turned toward the tall, gaunt knight. Sir Ilan Payne, captain of Tywin's household guard, had never known such attention, certainly not from the full weight of the royal court. And if given the choice, he would have gladly done without it. Why, your grace? He stammered. Look at me. Ilan swallowed hard, about to speak in his defense, but Aerys' voice cracked like a whip, cutting him short. Look into my eyes, Sir Knight, the king barked again, harsher this time. The king is nothing more than a puppet on the Iron Throne. If Lord Tywin wished it, he could kick that ugly arse aside and seat himself in an instant. Those were your words, were they not? Speak. And if I've missed a line, by all means add it. Sweat poured down Ilan's brow. Yes, he had spoken those words boastfully, drunkenly, long ago, when the king was still imprisoned at Duskendale. He had never dreamt such idle braggadocio would return to condemn him. How in the seven hells had Aerys heard of it? Ilan's whole body trembled. His thoughts raced back to that night, desperately trying to recall who had been present, who might have betrayed him. In despair he turned his eyes toward his Lord Tywin Lannister, silently begging for salvation. Is it true, Sir Ilan? To his horror, Tywin did not intercede on his behalf. Instead, he stepped forward, emerald gaze sharp as a blade. Did you say such words? My lord, I. Under Tywin's piercing stare, Ilan Payne could not force a single coherent denial past his lips. He longed to cry out that it was a lie, but with the king repeating his insult verbatim, and the full council as witness, the courage to brazen it out deserted him. His silence was damning. The chamber understood at once Aerys had not erred. Unforgivable. It was Sir Gerald Hightower, the White Bull himself, who spoke first, fury in his voice as he strode forward and dropped to one knee before the king. Your Grace, grant me the honor of punishing this insolent cur with my own hand. The dignity of House Targaryen cannot be mocked. Indeed, thundered Lord Lucerys Velaryon, the master of ships, rising to add his own outrage. The rule of House Targaryen must not be sullied. Such a man deserves no mercy. Gouge out his eyes, hack off his limbs, and throw the carcass to the swine. Kill him, others roared. Kill him. Their voices rose in a frenzy, the entire council baying for Payne's blood. Only Tywin remained silent, turning his gaze instead upon the king. Aerys met those green eyes and bared his teeth in a crooked, triumphant grin. Humph! Tywin's nostrils flared, his only reply a cold snort. Silence, he commanded. The word was softly spoken, yet it carried a gravity that quelled the entire hall at once. "What is this, Lord Tywin?" Aerys sneered, tone dripping with scorn. "Do you mean to shield your dog?" Instead of bristling, Tywin inclined his head politely and turned to face another lord at the table, his gaze fixed like a spear. "If I recall correctly, under the laws of the realm, those who spread falsehoods are punished by removal of the tongue. Is that not so, Lord Symond?" Caught off guard, Lord Symond Stanton, Master of Laws, faltered. He would have loved nothing more than to see Pain executed to watch Tywin squirm under his king's wrath. But Tywin's gaze bore down like an executioner's axe. He dared not lie. "You remember correctly, my lord. That is indeed the punishment prescribed." He hesitated. "But..." "Good." Tywin cut him off before he could add another word. Turning back to Ilyn Payne, he extended his hand. "Your dagger, Sir Knight." Lord." Ilyn's lips trembled. He wanted to beg, to plead, but knew better. To lose a tongue was a small price compared to losing his life. With shaking hands, he drew the dagger from his boot and surrendered it to Tywin. "Wait!" Aerys lurched to his feet, wild with fury. "That wretch insulted House Targaryen itself. And you would settle it with a missing tongue? You dare! The law is clear, your grace." Tywin's reply was calm, unflinching. "And since it was my man who transgressed, I shall deliver the sentence myself, in deference to the crown." "No!" Aerys shrieked, face twisting in madness. He jabbed a finger at Ilyn Payne, spittle flying. "I want him dead. Dead, do you hear me? Burn him alive." Before his ravings could spiral further, a firm hand clamped over his mouth. "Calm yourself, old man," Lance muttered harshly, forcing Aerys back into his chair. The entire chamber froze in shock. Someone had dared lay hands on the king, call him old man to his face. Not even Sir Gerald Hightower would have risked such sacrilege. And yet, instead of lashing out, Aerys stilled beneath Lance's grip. Slowly, his breathing eased. His violet eyes remained fixed, seething, upon Tywin with the dagger in hand. "Leave it to me," Lance whispered at his ear, giving the king a reassuring look. If this ended with Tywin dispensing a token punishment, Aerys' authority would be shredded before the court. That could not be allowed. Striding forward, he stopped before Tywin, extending his palm. "By the king's command, I shall carry out the sentence." "I heard no such command," Tywin said coolly, eyes narrowing as he studied the younger man's boldness. But to his surprise, the king immediately croaked out in support. "Sir Lancelot speaks with my voice. His word is my decree." The words rang out clear. And in that moment, Tywin Lannister recognized the threat. The king was ever suspicious by nature, so much so that even Sir Gerald Hightower and Sir Barristan Selmy could never fully earn his trust. Yet today, against all expectation, he had entrusted himself wholly to a stranger. And all because this man had spirited him out of the dungeons of Duskendale? No. It couldn't be that simple. Though reluctant, Tywin Lannister had no choice but to yield before the king's command in front of the court. Wordlessly, he reversed the dagger in his hand and pressed it into Sir Lancelot's palm. "Sir Lancelot, isn't it?" Tywin's voice was calm, almost courteous. "When you strike, make it swift. Sir Ilyn Payne may be about to lose his tongue, but he still has hands and feet to serve me. A hand of the king has much to do, and I cannot afford to lose his labor for long." Then, almost as an afterthought, Tywin added with a faint smile, "And of course, I have always admired men of courage. The Lannisters never stint when it comes to rewarding such men." The words were smooth, but Lancelot heard the iron beneath them, half threat, half temptation, gilded with the promise of Lannister gold. For was it not said, half in jest, that even Tywin's bowels passed nuggets of gold? To House Lannister, anything bought with coin was the cheapest price of all. "You needn't worry. Lance grinned as he accepted the blade, his tone as easy as if they were speaking of wine instead of blood. My hand is always clean and precise. If you doubt it, ask Sir Simon hollered back in Duskendale, though he may not be in any condition to answer. Without waiting for Tywin's reply, he brushed past him and strode toward Ilyn Payne. Open your mouth, Sir. Ilyn swallowed hard, casting one last desperate glance at Tywin, as if begging for reprieve. Do as Sir Lancelot commands, Tywin said coldly from behind. His words were edged with meaning. The law of the realm is clear, those who spread slander shall lose their tongues. Those who murder, shall pay with their lives. Assured by Tywin's promise, Ilyn's trembling lips parted. Wider, wider still. Lancelot's voice was mocking, amused. He peered into Payne's gullet until he could see the man's very tonsils, then gave a satisfied nod. And then, in one lightning movement, he struck. Schkk. The dagger plunged through Ilyn Payne's mouth, the steel bursting out the back of his skull. With a brutal twist, Lancelot dragged the blade sideways across the man's cheek, then reached in with his free hand. Before anyone could react, half of Ilyn Payne's head hung loose from his neck, his body collapsing to the floor in a crimson heap. Oh dear! My apologies! Lancelot flicked away the ragged scrap of tongue he had torn free and turned to face the stunned assembly. His voice was light, almost playful. Perhaps I used a touch too much force. But then what's the difference? A tongue's a tongue. One way or another, it's gone. He shrugged, his gaze sliding toward Tywin. A pity, though. Sir Ilyn Payne won't be serving you any longer, my lord hand. But with the wealth of House Lannister, I'm sure finding another captain of guards won't be much trouble, will it? Chapter 14, Chapter 14 Clad in White. Chapter 14 Clad in White. He actually dared. He truly dared. Watching Lance finish what he had done, Sir Barristan felt a pressure in his chest dissolve all at once. Even he, famed as the bold, would never have risked such defiance, not before the full royal council, and certainly not under the cold green gaze of Tywin Lannister. Perhaps the title the Fearless belonged not to him, but to this young knight. Sir Lance the Fearless, it has a ring to it. But the trouble was only beginning. To slay Tywin's man before his very eyes, Tywin Lannister would not let that pass quietly. The man is dead. If you don't mean to put me on trial, Lord Hand. Lance shrugged as if it were all the same to him. Then kindly step aside. I would return to his grace. Tywin did not move. He neither acknowledged Lance's words nor glanced at the corpse cooling on the floor. He only stared at the young knight, his emerald eyes unreadable, as though weighing something far beyond the moment. Lance did not yield an inch. He locked eyes with the Lion of Casterly Rock, stubborn and unflinching, like some green boy too reckless to know fear. Step aside, Tywin. The tension broke only when the king's voice rang out. Let Sir Lancelot come forward. I have an announcement for you all. Aerys's words struck like a hammer, scattering the invisible swords that hung between them. Tywin did not yield at once, though he held his ground for a long, heavy 7 or 8 seconds before finally shifting just enough to let Lance pass. You are memorable, sire. He spoke softly as Lance strode by. The young knight glanced at him, but Tywin's face betrayed nothing, neither anger at the humiliation nor pleasure at the display. Was it a threat? A grudging compliment? Impossible to say. Either way, Lance cared little. His blade had avenged the man who had saved him in prison. That debt repaid, the rest of them Lannister or no meant nothing to him. Your Grace. He dropped to one knee before the king, abandoning the irreverent old man he had once used. Hat, hat. The king's grin spread wide, uncontainable. Not even in the days before Duskendale had Aerys so thoroughly enjoyed himself. To see Tywin Lannister forced to swallow such bitter humiliation, how sweet it was. He still remembered the sting of last year, when at the great tourney of Lannisport, the cheers for Tywin had nearly drowned out his own royal presence. It had been an insult he had never forgiven. And later, when Tywin had offered his daughter Cersei as a bride for Prince Rhaegar, Aerys had scorned him to his face. "You are my most loyal servant, Tywin. But servants and masters' heirs do not Wednesday." Tywin had borne the slight in silence, his composure unbroken. But Aerys had known full well who truly ruled the realm, and it was not he. Yet today, watching Tywin bite back his pride, the king's joy was unrestrained. Clap! Clap! The king's hands rang out, and into the tent strode a bald man bearing a folded cloak of pure white. "Sir Lancelot!" Aerys took the cloak with delight and held it high for all to see. "I seem to recall your white cloak was lost at Duskendale." "Yes, your grace," Lance declared, voice proud and clear. "I ran Sir Simon Hollard through with it, avenging Sir Gawain Gaunt." He spoke boldly, eyes alight as he gazed upon the snow-white cloak in the king's hands. "An S-rank reward." His words rippled through the gathered lords. Many had thought the young knight no more than a lucky fool who happened to free the king. But if he had indeed slain the infamous Simon Hollard even while protecting the king himself, then this was no mere chance. This was strength. "Excellent," Aerys beamed. "The Kingsguard needs men such as you." With almost childlike glee, he draped the great white cloak across Lance's shoulders, fastening the knots himself. "Sir Gerald Hightower." At last the king turned, summoning the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. The towering white bull strode forward and bent to one knee. "Your Grace." It was the first time since his return that the king had drawn the Kingsguard captain so near. Did it mean Aerys trusted them again? None could say. "Sir Lance swore his vows to me at Duskendale. There is no need to repeat the ceremony." The king's voice carried through the tent. "But as Lord Commander, I think it fitting you present your new brother with a gift. For as I understand it, Sir Lance does not even possess a proper sword." As he spoke, Aerys cast a sidelong glance at the blade at Gerald Hightower's hip. The implication was plain. The king had spoken lightly, almost carelessly, yet the words sent a fresh shock through the assembly. The king himself issued the command ordering the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard to present his own sword to Lancelot. What did this mean? Had His Majesty already chosen the next Lord Commander? It wasn't Sir Barristan Selmy. It wasn't Arthur Dane, the fabled Sword of the Morning. Nor was it Prince Lewin Martell of Dorne. Instead, the honour went to a stranger, an unknown knight whose name had never before graced the halls of power. One must understand, every Lord Commander of the Kingsguard was chosen with the utmost care. After all, the post not only granted a seat at the small council but also placed one closer to the king than any other. Just look at those who had worn the white cloak before. Prince Aemon the Dragon Knight. Sir Duncan the Tall. And the current Lord Commander, Sir Gerald the White Bull Hightower. Each one was a legend forged in the crucible of battle, knights whose deeds of blood and steel could fill tomes as thick as the White Book. And yet now, the king commanded his Lord Commander to place his very sword into the hands of an outsider. Under the gaze of all present, Sir Gerald Hightower froze for a heartbeat, then, without hesitation, rose to his feet. With a hiss of steel, he drew the long sword at his side. To rescue the king from Duskendale, that was something none of us could accomplish, the White Bull declared in a solemn voice, his stern features locked on the unfamiliar knight before him. "You not only saved His Majesty, but you also restored the honour of the Kingsguard. For that, you have earned this, Sir Lance." He held out the weapon with both hands. "This sword is named Guardian. It may not be Valyrian steel, but it has served me faithfully for more than a decade. Accept it as a gift, to mark the day you don the white cloak. Wield it well in the king's defence." Lance grasped the hilt without ceremony and raised the blade high with one hand. Forged for the White Bull's massive frame, the sword was broader and heavier than most longswords. Though not as vast as Dawn, the ancestral great sword of House Dane, it was weighty enough to test any man's strength. Yet thanks to the lingering fusion of the Khal Drogo template, which had risen to 42.7% integration after the Battle of Duskendale, Lance lifted the weapon as though it were but a toy. Clap, clap, clap. Barristan was the first to break into applause. At once, the great tent erupted in thunderous clapping and cheers. Even Tywin Lannister himself stood and applauded with impeccable courtesy. Though few knew who Lance truly was, no one wished to deny the king his moment of triumph. Ding! System alert, host has obtained S-rank title Kingsguard. Reward, +1 S-rank draw. As the cheers resounded, Lance grinned broadly, raising Guardian toward the rafters before turning to King Aerys. "It is time, Your Grace," he declared, voice ringing above the crowd. "Time for those who erred to pay the price." Chapter 15. Chapter 15 In this life, a man must keep his word. Chapter 15 In this life, a man must keep his word. Duskendale. The sky was just beginning to brighten, a pale silver stretching across the east. Riding tall in the saddle, Sir Lancelot strode through the city's main gate in full view of everyone, an almost comical contrast to the last time, when he had been a fugitive, hounded to desperation. Now, as the newly anointed Kingsguard and the commander personally appointed by His Majesty, he naturally inherited Sir Ilan Payne's authority, taking control of the 10,000-strong Targaryen host without resistance. He had never commanded an army before, but Lance knew one thing well enough: when you held overwhelming superiority, the enemy was nothing but paper tigers. So he abandoned the thought of intricate tactics. His order was simple: everyone attacks at once. Strategy? For an army this size storming a mere provincial town, the best strategy was none at all. Infantry or navy, cavalry or crossbowmen, it didn't matter. No one was playing support here. Everyone was main force. But, as it turned out, the enemy denied him even this chance at bloodshed. When his troops reached the city walls, they found the gates already flung wide. Duskendale, tightly locked for half a year, now lay spread open like a courtesan welcoming her lord. Quick to surrender, aren't they? Lance, no longer the ragged fugitive he once was, cut a striking figure in his spotless white cloak and armor. His presence was so commanding that even Sir Barristan Selmy, whose golden hair and chiseled face had long been the dream of noble ladies in King's Landing, seemed overshadowed at his side. Duskendale's a prosperous trade hub, but the Darklands have never had much of an army, Barristan explained patiently, seeing that Lance had little experience in war. They can barely field 1,000 men. The only reason they dared defy us before was because they held His Majesty hostage. After half a year under siege, even their granaries must be bare. Their surrender is only natural. Lance, however, barely listened. His eyes weren't focused on the ruined streets or the hollow-eyed townsfolk. His gaze hovered strangely, as if fixed on something only he could see. Current template, Rhaegar Targaryen, fusion 72.7%. Profile, the Silver Prince, last true heir of the dragon, the knight whose harp was sharper than his sword, free fish food at the Trident. The dragon has 3 heads. That was the template he had drawn the night before. Even better, he had discovered something new: cards of equal rank could be sacrificed to increase the fusion rate of another. Without hesitation, Lance had discarded Khal Drogo's card to feed into Rhaegar's. Not that he believed Rhaegar to be stronger than Drogo in raw power. But here, in Westeros, as a sworn brother of the Kingsguard, it was the sword that mattered most. And honestly, what Kingsguard knight in the white cloak would look dignified swinging a curved Dothraki Irak? That would be an insult to Sir Gerald Hightower's gift of the longsword guardian. What stunned Lance was the result. At just over 70% fusion, his strength had multiplied several times over. Every motion with the sword flowed as naturally as moving his own arm. Rhaegar Targaryen, it seemed, truly was a prodigy of the blade. Legend had it he never trained much at all. One day, the prince simply decided he wished to become a warrior. He picked up a sword, trained a few years under knights like Arthur Dane and Barristan the Bold, and emerged nearly their equal. To Lance, this revelation meant something greater. A shortcut. A path to rise faster and higher than anyone else. The plan was simple: climb, and keep climbing. Secure higher identities, seize stronger templates. Perhaps start with something modest, like say becoming the next Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. Of course, he had no ill will toward Sir Gerald Hightower. The White Bull had even gifted him a sword. But Lancelot's hunger for progress was insatiable. And no one, not king, not lord, not knight, could stand in his way. Seeing that Lance ignored him, Barristan didn't take offense. After all, the young man couldn't be more than 20, and to have already achieved such merit at his age, a little pride was understandable. When Barristan himself was 16, he had entered a tourney and defeated both Prince Duncan the Small and Sir Duncan the Tall, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. The confidence and fire he carried back then easily surpassed the arrogance Lance now displayed. And if he hadn't possessed absolute faith in his own ability, he never would have dared such madness as infiltrating Duskendale alone to rescue the king. True, he hadn't been much help in the end and nearly broke his leg jumping off the walls, but still, the courage had been there. "Commander!" A knight in black armor came riding hard, pulling his horse to a sharp stop before them. He pulled off his helm, revealing a mane of dazzling golden hair that almost hurt the eyes, his face bright with excitement. "We've captured the entire Darkland family, Dennis the traitor included. Guess how we found him?" There was a mocking gleam in the knight's eyes, as though Dennis Darkland's fate delighted him. "Tell me, Sir Morfydd," Lance replied coolly, arching a brow. Though a Valyrian by name, this young knight bore none of old Valyria's looks. With his golden hair, he looked far more like a Lannister. Then again, golden hair was not theirs alone. Morfydd Valyrian had always been a hardliner. More than once he had urged Tywin to storm Duskendale outright, only to be overruled by the Hand's cautious insistence that he would not gamble needlessly. Only when the town's supplies were nearly exhausted and Dennis Darkland had lost all hope had Tywin at last agreed to advance. Had it not been for Lance's single-handed dash to spirit the king out, they would likely already be arranging Aerys' funeral and debating which new king to crown. To Morfydd, Lance was nothing less than a living legend and idol he gladly addressed as commander. When we reached Dun Fort, that traitor was lying trussed up in the great hall, not a stitch of clothing on him. Morfydd said gleefully. According to his own confession, his wife from Mere tied him up in his sleep together with his steward, John Hollard. The pair ran off with gold and jewels, leaving him naked and helpless. We questioned the servants, and it turns out those two had been carrying on for ages. Half the castle staff had heard the whispers. Only poor Dennis was fool enough to stay in the dark. Humph! Lance let out a derisive snort through his nose. I'd heard he was weak-willed. Seems the rumors were true. Any lord who lives by a woman's word will end up destroyed by it. Morfydd nodded vigorously, agreeing with every word. Barristan, on the other hand, coughed awkwardly and said nothing. After all, it had been at his fiancée's urging that he had joined the Kingsguard, and within half a year, that same girl had married his cousin. Best not to dwell on that memory. "Where are the two runaways now?" Lance asked, ignoring Barristan's silence. "No trace yet, Commander," Morfydd answered honestly, squaring his shoulders. "But rest assured our fleet has the coast locked tight. They won't escape." Lance inclined his head, but his voice remained firm. "See that you search thoroughly. His Majesty gave strict orders before we set out, not a single Darkland or Hollard is to be spared." He gave a cold cough, then added with grim finality. "A knight must keep his word. If we vow to wipe out their house, then wipe them out to the last." Chapter 16, Chapter 16 Conflict. Chapter 16 Conflict. "Why yes, Commander." Morfydd answered at once, then spurred his horse forward to relay orders to the men. Beside him, however, Barristan frowned, unease written on his face. "Sir Lance." He hesitated for a moment before finally speaking. It's true Dennis Darkland betrayed the crown, but, is it not too cruel to wipe out both House Darkland and House Hollard in their entirety? Perhaps executing the chief culprits would be punishment enough. Chief culprits? Lance shot him a sidelong glance and gave a derisive snort. Take that argument to the king. With that, he dismissed the Kingsguard with silence. He could more or less guess what Barristan was thinking. After all, exterminating an entire family was rare even in Westerosi history. The great houses of the realm had been bound in a web of blood ties for thousands of years. Nearly every family could trace some kinship to another, even if only faintly. Which meant that, however grave the crime, complete eradication was almost never carried out. At the very least, a bloodline was spared. The last great extermination had been over a decade ago, when Lord Tywin Lannister ordered House Rain drowned in the mines of Castamere. That massacre gave birth to the famous ballad The Rains of Castamere. From then on, Tywin had no need to send an army to chastise rebellious vassals, he merely dispatched a bard to perform the song beneath their roof. One verse was enough to break their defiance. The effect of annihilation spoke for itself. As for Aerys, Lance doubted the king thought so far ahead. More likely it was simple spite, the lingering rage of being imprisoned for half a year in darkness and humiliation. But in truth, such vengeance also served a purpose. Duskendale's blood would become a warning to all who might dare defy royal authority. If Barristan's view prevailed, kill only a handful of ringleaders and call it justice, then what would stop others from testing the king's safety in the future? Was the punishment for abducting a king to be so lenient? Should every petty lord take turns tying him up for fun? In Lance's mind, for the king of the Seven Kingdoms to have been caged and mocked by a mere landed lord was humiliation beyond bearing. The fact that Aerys had not ordered a complete sack of the town already showed restraint. Had it been Lance himself, escaping with the king's life and standing in a position of strength, he would hardly have upheld lofty moral principles. After all, in his previous life he had belonged to a great nation where strength was virtue and bloodshed in war was routine. To grind an enemy into the earth was nothing unusual, merely standard procedure. Barristan could only sigh helplessly as Lance spurred his horse and rode away. He was no saint himself. As a veteran of countless battles, his hands were already stained with more blood than the combined members of House Darkland and House Hollard could ever spill. True, not on the same scale as Lance's past life where the fall of night itself brought the death of millions, but still, enough. And he understood the simple truth: mercy to one's enemies was cruelty to oneself. Yet he could not help but feel a pang of regret. For the fall of a house meant its name would vanish from the continent. Darkland and Hollard would become nothing more than entries in the annals of history, both their moments of glory and their humiliations alike. House Darkland especially had once shone bright in Targaryen history. In 2 centuries of Targaryen rule, they had produced no fewer than 7 Kingsguard knights, a number unmatched by any other house in Westeros. Among them was Sir Robin Darkland, the Dark Robin, one of the very first members chosen by Queen Visenya Targaryen for her brother, King Aegon I, when he founded the Kingsguard. And now, that same house, famed for loyalty and iron discipline, was condemned for treason, to be eradicated by the very Kingsguard they had so often served. Fate could be bitterly ironic. As Lance and Barristan pressed forward, a commotion suddenly drew their attention. Lance looked up and saw nearly 100 Targaryen soldiers surrounding a small house, shouting furiously within. "You bastards, robbers, murderers, rapists! Hand over the killer, or I'll bring this matter before his grace himself." The voice made Lance frown. It sounded all too familiar. He spurred his horse forward and peered into the crowd from above. Sure enough, it was old Sir Rivera Iricker. "Shut your mouth!" In the center stood a knight clad in black steel, his voice dripping with arrogance. He brandished his blade at Rivera, barking insults. Unlike the common soldiers, his armor was distinctive. Dragon scale ridges crested his helm like horns, the pauldrons flaring outward like wings, and layered black steel scales covered his back. This was no ordinary knight, his appearance screamed elite. We've already explained, Sir Ricard mistook her for a commoner, the knight sneered, showing not a shred of respect to the minor lord before him. He then pulled 2 golden dragons from his cloak and flung them in Rivera's face with a contemptuous flick of the wrist. Here's Sir Ricard's compensation for your wife. Take it and stop wasting our time, Lord Rivera. We have the king's orders to carry out. Get that filthy money away from me. Rivera roared, his long sword raised in outrage. Unless you can bring Vanessa back from the grave, hand over the bastard who killed her. I'll skin him alive and hang his hide on Duskendale's walls. She was 8 months pregnant. And that animal still laid hands on her. Behind him, 3 of his household knights stood tense, fury burning in their eyes. If not for the sheer difference in numbers, they would already have charged to their lord's side. The Black Knight's face twitched. Sweat trickled down his brow as he silently cursed Sir Ricard 100 times over. Betting a woman was one thing, but betting a nobleman's wife was suicide. And to murder her afterward, heavy with child? Madness. Worse still, the husband had walked in on the crime. Had the Black Knight not arrived in time, Ricard would already be cooling in his own blood. My lord, perhaps we can. One of his retainers stepped close and whispered urgently in his ear. The knight's eyes flickered, then narrowed with malice. A cruel smile curved across his lips. He raised his sword high and bellowed to his men. These traitors are Darkland collaborators. By order of his grace, all who consorted with House Darkland are to be executed without mercy. Kill them all. Rivera's face went pale. Wait. I stand with the king. I helped his grace escape last night, you can ask him yourself. But his protests were drowned beneath the thundering boots and the gleam of steel. The Targaryen soldiers, their eyes bloodshot and weapons flashing, advanced like a tide of iron. A wave of despair crashed over Rivera's heart. Was this how his house would end? A lifetime of loyalty to the Targaryens, risking everything to help the king flee, only to be destroyed by the king's own soldiers? He let out a bitter laugh. Had. Gripping his long sword tighter, he resolved to cut down at least 1 or 2 before he fell. But just as the black tide closed in, a streak of white suddenly appeared among the dark steel gleaming robes and armor, dazzlingly bright against the sea of black. A white cloak. A Kingsguard. Chapter 17, Chapter 17 Watch your tongue. Chapter 17 Watch your tongue. Out of my sight, you mangy curs. Lance spurred his horse forward, cutting into the infantry formation from behind. The soldiers of House Targaryen were thrown into chaos, trampled beneath the pounding hooves. In a matter of seconds, more than 10 men were sent sprawling, groaning in pain from the brutal collision. Those who still thought of resisting froze the moment their eyes caught the white cloak and armor he wore. Fear and reverence flashed in their gaze as they quickly lowered their weapons. The Kingsguard. They might not know Lance's face, but that armor was identity enough. His mount continued forward, iron-shod hooves crunching bones as he rode into the circle of men. Lance didn't so much as glance down at the bodies beneath him. Under the uneasy stares of the black-armored knights, he brought his horse into the space between both sides. Then, with deliberate calm, he wheeled around, placing himself squarely in front of Rivera and his companions, shielding them with an air of absolute authority. What is going on here? His voice was cold, detached, without hurry, without warmth. We've captured these accomplices of House Darkland, sire. Silence. I didn't ask you. The black-armored knight who had stepped forward to explain was instantly cut off. Lance's voice cracked like a whip, then he turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing on Rivera. You. Speak. But, sire. Sking. Steel rasped as Lance drew the great sword gifted to him by the White Bull. He laid its gleaming edge across the knight's shoulder, the tip hovering less than a hand's breadth from the man's throat. The knight swallowed hard, sweat beading at his temple. Behind the visor of Lance's helm, Cold blue eyes glared at him, eyes that carried open, unmasked killing intent. Another word, and his head would part ways with his body. "You may continue, Lord Reverie." The knight dared not move. Only then did Lance lower his voice again, firm and commanding. Reverie, who had been momentarily stunned, finally understood this Kingsguard wasn't here to condemn him. He was here to shield him. Something about the man's back seemed oddly familiar, but for the life of him, he couldn't recall where he had seen it before. After all, Lance's current appearance was a far cry from the way he had looked the previous night. "Yes, sire." Reverie straightened, rage boiling once more as he jabbed a finger toward the black-armored knight and spat out his fury. "Last night, my men and I risked everything to smuggle His Majesty the King out of the city. Knowing the Darklands would strike back, I secretly moved my family out of our keep, hiding them here. We spent the whole night evading the Darkland hounds. At dawn, we heard word of their surrender and were preparing to bring my wife back home. But when we returned, what did we find? His men, slaughtering her without mercy." His voice broke with grief. "They tore the clothes from her body, and right before my eyes, they drove their swords into her belly. My Vanessa, my poor wife, she was 8 months with child. Our house was about to welcome a new heir, and yet..." He raised a trembling hand, pointing straight at the black-armored knight. "This wretch, this shameless dog hid the murderer behind him. Then he dared insult me with a bribe of 2 gold dragons. 2 dragons for my wife's life? For my unborn child? For the honor of our house? 7 hells take you all." Reverie's voice broke into sobs, his throat hoarse as though it bled with every word. By the end, his strength failed him, and he dropped to one knee, burying his face in his hands as grief overtook him. Lance did not look back. His cold gaze remained fixed upon the black-armored knight as he asked, evenly, "Is what he says true?" But instead of shame or remorse, the knight met Lance's stare with haughty disdain. His voice was low, heavy with implied threat. "I am sworn to Prince Rhaegar's Dragon Guard, sire. On my honor, I swear these men are accomplices of House Darkland. Do not hinder us in carrying out His Grace's command." "Is it true?" Lance repeated, his tone unchanged, as though he had not heard the knight's lofty title at all. The knight's brows furrowed. Something about this Kingsguard felt different. Narrowing his eyes, he demanded, "Who are you, truly? Forgive my bluntness, but I have seen every member of the Kingsguard. Never once have I seen you. What hole did you crawl out of, impostor?" The words fell like a hammer. Soldiers around them erupted into murmurs, weapons raised as suspicion burned in their eyes. To impersonate a Kingsguard, one of the most sacred offices in all the realm, was treason of the highest order. But then, a deep, resonant voice cut through the tension. "Lay down your arms, men. The knight who stands before you is none other than Sir Lancelot, the man who rode through fire and steel to deliver the king from his chains. Sir Lancelot! By the 7, it's true. Sir Lancelot!" The name rolled across the street like thunder. Suspicion gave way to awe, and awe to reverence. Tales of Sir Lancelot's midnight charge had already spread through the camps. A lone knight who had broken the siege of Duskendale, riding through arrow and flame, cutting down guards by the dozen to snatch the king from captivity. Some claimed he stood 12 feet tall, twice the height of Sir Duncan the Tall. Others swore he breathed fire like a dragon, burning the Darkland host to cinders, while 1,000 arrows clattered harmlessly against his back. Such were the legends of great knights. And for common soldiers, men who dreamed of earning spurs and shedding the yoke of birth, the sight of one such legend was near divine. Even Reverie, drowning in grief, could not help but lift his tear-streaked face toward the broad white figure before him. His mind filled with the memory of last night, the vision of that same man, wreathed in fire, riding forth with the king behind him. Who dares spread such lies? The black-armored knight snapped, though unease gnawed at him. He turned, intent on exposing the so-called liar. But his breath caught in his throat. For there, stepping into view, was another white-cloaked figure. Sir Barristan. The name left his lips in a trembling whisper. His body shuddered despite himself. At Dragonstone, he had often seen Sir Arthur Dane, the Sword of the Morning, Prince Rhaegar's dearest friend. But Arthur was different. Barristan the Bold was another matter entirely. Strength unmatched, temper fiery, and honor unbending. It was said that if he were angered, not even Lord Tywin Lannister himself would dare stand in his way. "What are you staring at?" Lance's voice was flat, his right hand pressing forward. The edge of his great sword crept closer to the knight's throat, the steel kissing bare flesh. "This is the last time I'll ask. Did Lord Rhaegarys speak the truth?" The knight's chest tightened. For the briefest instant, staring into Lance's pale blue eyes, he felt as though he were looking directly into Prince Rhaegar's. Fear of death clawed at his resolve. His voice cracked as he blurted, "Why yes. It's true. Sir Ricard told me before we even reached the city that he meant to vent his rage in Duskendale. At first I thought it was mere bluster. Perhaps roughing up some peasants, nothing more. But then, he found the Lord Rhaegarys' wife." His voice dropped to a plea as he glanced at Lance. "I swear it was not my doing, Sir Ricard. He has been Prince Rhaegar's squire since boyhood. He is close friends with Lord John Connington and Sir Oswell Went. I had no choice but to obey his word. Do not blame me. Curse the Lord Rhaegarys' wife's misfortune. Had she revealed her identity sooner, perhaps Ricard would never have." Crack! The sharp sound of a slap rang out. The knight staggered, blood and spit spraying from his mouth as his body bent under the blow. Lance drew his hand back, eyes flashing with suppressed fury. His voice was low, cold, and final. "Enough." Chapter 18 Kill. Chapter 18 Kill. Dong, dong dong. Mahler stood at the door, balancing a tray of steaming roasted meat, and knocked carefully. From inside came the sound of a woman's pitiful sobs, laced with a man's vulgar, drunken laughter. A spark of anger welled up in him, but he quickly smothered it. After all, he was the one who had invited them in. Perhaps they were too caught up in their fun, because no one inside came to answer the door. He waited a long while, then adjusted his breath, preparing to knock again. Just as he raised his hand, the sharp rhythm of hooves echoed behind him. Turning around in confusion, he caught sight of a fluttering white cloak. Lord! A man who had travelled far and wide, Mahler immediately recognized the snow-white cloak of the Kingsguard. He bent at once, clutching the meat protectively, bowing low in deference. In this famine-stricken town, food was worth more than gold. He had spent every last coin he owned to trade for this cut of meat from the local butcher. As for where the butcher had gotten it, that wasn't Mahler's concern. It was only that about a week ago, the butcher's wife had disappeared. Starved to death, maybe. Ever since the king's army had surrounded the town, food had grown scarcer by the day. Soon, even money couldn't buy a single morsel. Many had gone mad from hunger, many more had dropped dead in the streets. The town had long since lost its lively spark. Just like the blacksmith's apprentice across the street, he'd sold every last possession, vowing to spend it all in yellow pearl before he died. No one knew if he had actually made it. 2 knights in black armor went inside, didn't they? The rider's steed reared, its massive hooves nearly crushing Mahler's skull. "Yes, my lord." Mahler snapped out of his wandering thoughts and hurriedly nodded and bowed. "Sir Richard and Sir Miles entered some time ago." From within the house came the broken cries of a woman again. "And the women inside, who are they?" Mahler forced an awkward laugh. My wife, and my 2 daughters. They're raping your wife and daughters, and yet you bring them food. Even a fool could tell what was happening behind that door." The knight's face twisted with disbelief at Mahler's answer. I. Mahler's lips trembled. He wanted to explain, but the words stuck in his throat. How could he admit that he was bartering away his wife and daughters for the chance of being knighted? Such things could never be spoken aloud. Humph! The knight's eyes narrowed. He had heard enough. He swung down from his horse, striding past Mahler. As he did, his elbow slammed brutally into Mahler's gut. Caught off guard, Mahler collapsed to his knees, retching violently. The roasted meat slipped from his grasp, tumbling across the dirt, coated in grime. Cough, cough. Clutching his stomach, Mahler reached out, grabbing at the knight's spotless white boots. His eyes begged for an answer why? His only reply was another merciless kick to the skull. Some things never change. You're still disgusting, Mahler. Blood streamed down Mahler's face. Dizzy, fading, he suddenly realized why that voice sounded so familiar. You're. I am the nightmare of you filth. With a roar, the knight raised his armored boot and slammed it into the door. Bang! Bastards! Get the hell out! Inside the room, one of the armored men was in the middle of his vile fun. Thinking it was only Mahler barging in, he turned to curse only to meet a fist the size of a hammer. Bang! The blow sent him flying half a yard off the woman, crashing to the ground in a heap. The sudden violence stunned the other knight, who had been busy tying rope around a second woman's limbs. What are you doing, Kingsguard? He had never seen this man before, but that iconic white armor could not be mistaken. Dropping the rope, he swaggered forward, shamelessly exposed, and jabbed a finger at the intruder's face. Disgusting! Lance sneered coldly, one hand resting on his sword hilt. Before the man could react, steel flashed. He felt a sudden chill below his waist, then an agony like fire as blood gushed forth in torrents. Screaming, he collapsed to his knees, clutching between his legs, but no pressure could staunch the flood. Lance did not spare him so much as a flicker of pity. A glance around the room showed 3 women stripped bare, bound with ropes, their bodies covered in bruises and cuts. They had clearly suffered monstrous cruelty. Lance's expression was still, but his eyes were colder than death. The desire to kill burned within him. Richard Lynmouth. The great sword leveled at the kneeling knight. Lance's voice was like ice. At that question, the fear of death drowned out the man's pain. Shaking his head violently, he thrust out a trembling finger pointing at the one Lance had punched unconscious. "Thank you, Sir Miles Mouton," Lance said with mock politeness, offering him a smile and a nod. Relief flickered across Miles's face. But confusion followed. How does he know my name? He never found the answer. A flash of steel, and the next instant his throat was opened wide. Trash! Unworthy of breathing in this world. His body hit the floor with a heavy thud. At the doorway, Mahler, still battered and bleeding, had tripped on the threshold. Wide-eyed, he stared in horror, muttering, Lance, impossible!" Lance slung his sword over his shoulder, grinning down at him. "Oh right! I almost forgot about you. Dash! Damn it, why isn't he back yet?" Outside, Sir Barristan Selmy planted his sword in the ground, standing as a wall before Rivera and the other 2. The circle of soldiers around them grew tighter by the minute, and his unease mounted. It had been nearly half an hour since Lance went inside. In that time, the black-armoured knights, still smarting from their humiliation, had summoned more and more of Prince Rhaegar's men. Were it not for Lance's strict order to hold position, they would already have rushed in to silence the witnesses. But Barristan Selmy's name alone was enough to hold them back. Even 300 strong, none dared to test the White Knight's blade. "Stand aside, sire," Roland demanded, stepping forward. His eyes glittered with malice as he rubbed his bruised and swollen face. "Prince Rhaegar will never allow his dearest friend to be branded a rapist and a murderer. You know this. If his friend breaks the law, that is fact." Barristan's eyelids lifted slightly, his voice ringing with unshakable conviction. "I will advise His Highness to find himself another friend." "You?" Roland's face darkened. Grinding his teeth, he spat, "You swore loyalty to House Targaryen. Do you understand what you're doing? If word of this spreads, the prince's reputation will be ruined." But Barristan stood like an unyielding wall. When Roland inched closer, Barristan raised his blade, his voice like a thunderclap. "Back, sire! I swore my oath to the king and to protect his blood from harm. That does not mean the prince's companions may commit vile crimes unchecked. Until my brother-in-arms returns with the guilty, I will not yield a single step. And should you cowards dare wickedness before my eyes, I swear I will cut you down one by one, just as I felled Meleys the monstrous." Chapter 19, Chapter 19 Lancelot the Fearless. Chapter 19 Lancelot the Fearless. The moment Sir Barristan spoke, his presence alone silenced the crowd. Even Roland faltered, his mouth opening and closing without a sound. He dared not speak against the legendary knight before him. Measured by feats of arms alone, this middle-aged Kingsguard stood in a class of his own within all of Westeros. Even the famed Sword of the Morning, hailed as the finest knight of the Seven Kingdoms, stood a step behind him. After all, Barristan Selmy was no mere title. He had once cut his way into an enemy host thousands strong, slaying their general with his own hand. A man of living legend. Yet, even so, Roland's ambition did not fade. After a moment's thought, he leaned close to his men and whispered darkly, "Watch my signal. When I move, rush in and cut them down. I refuse to believe one man can hold back hundreds of us. But remember, under no circumstance are you to strike Sir Barristan. Do you hear me?" "Understood, my lord," came the reply. With that, his men slipped quietly into the throng. Roland drew a slow breath, eyes narrowing with malice as he stared at those huddled behind Barristan. Rivera and the others, exhausted from fleeing all night, sat slumped on the ground. They must die, he thought coldly. Without witnesses, Barristan and this upstart Lancelot could say what they wished before the king. None could contradict them. But nothing escaped Barristan the Bold. His seasoned eyes noted every shifting soldier in the crowd. Lifting his long sword, he edged back a step, shielding Rivera and the others. "On your feet! Take up your arms, my lord," he barked. "Stay close behind me. I'll lead us out." His voice rang with iron-clad certainty, radiating a confidence born of countless battles. Wearied though they were, Rivera and his companions obeyed at once, gripping their weapons and drawing close to Barristan's side. The air grew taut, blades drawn, every heartbeat heavier than the last. Roland clenched his jaw, ready to give the signal, when suddenly, a round, heavy object came hurtling down from above. It smashed into the ground with a thud, nearly striking Roland himself. "Who in the seven hells is throwing?" He began to curse, but the words died on his lips as the thing rolled twice and came to rest before him, face turned upward. A human head. Roland's eyes bulged. "Seven, save us!" Before his horror could form words, a thunderous voice bellowed from the edge of the crowd. "Out of the way, you fools! Move, or be trampled!" The standoff shattered as a warhorse thundered through, soldiers shrieking as they were knocked aside under its hooves. And upon that destree rode Lancelot. The beast was a proud Riverland charger, and today it had carried its master through 2 charges over the bodies of Targaryen loyalists, enough to rival any famed warhorse of legend. "Lancelot!" Roland spat in fury. His finger stabbed toward the fallen head. "What have you done?" "That is Sir Richard Lynmouth, sworn companion of Prince Rhaegar and heir to House Lynmouth. You've doomed yourself. Not even the white cloak of the Kingsguard will shield you from the wrath of Rhaegar, of Lord Lynmouth, nor from Lord Baratheon himself." Smack! Lance's gauntlet hand struck Roland across the face, silencing him at once. Both cheeks swelled red, almost comically symmetrical. "Enough! The coldness in Lance's gaze brought Roland's fear rushing back, the memory of another slap, not long ago. He dared not speak again. But Lance leaned down in the saddle, voice low, meant for Roland alone. Rigor. Lunmouth. Baratheon. Have I repeated that wrongly? Roland kept silent, but Lancelot's eyes hardened. Answer me. Look at me. Jolted by the command, Roland lifted his gaze only to meet the lifeless stare of Richard Lunmouth's severed head. Terror clawed at his chest. Above it, Lance's piercing blue eyes bored into him, so like the prince he served. Yes, yes, sire. Roland stammered, his voice loud and desperate, as if declaring fealty. Good. Satisfied, Lance straightened, wheeled his mount into the center, and raised his blade high. Rivera looked on with gratitude as Lance's voice boomed across the square. I am Lancelot. Some of you may have heard my name. Many of you have not. No matter. What you must know is this: the man behind me is Lord Rivera Ricker, a true and loyal knight of the realm. It is true I pulled his grace from the trap at Duskendale, but I was not alone. Without the aid of Lord Ricker, both I and our king would have perished beneath Darkland steel. Tell me, when your king was trapped in Duskendale's walls, how many of you were at his side? How many of you dared ride to his rescue? His voice thundered across the assembly. None. The single word cracked like a war horn, echoing in every soldier's ear. As Lance's cold gaze swept across them, the soldiers lowered their eyes one by one. Shame weighed heavy, and their hands slowly slackened on their weapons. Then, with a deliberate motion, Lance levelled his long sword, its blade pointing toward the severed head of Sir Richard Lunmouth lying on the ground. Lord Rivera risked everything, his life, his house, his honour, to save both me and his grace, and through us, this very realm. For that loyalty, he was hunted through the night, his family forced from their castle, hounded by the Dark Lins. And when his strength was spent, when he had proven his faith beyond doubt, this nobleman, this true servant of the crown, his pregnant wife, was ravished by that dog, Richard Lunmouth. Lance's words rang with such force that even the hardened men about him could not help but believe. At that, Lord Rivera himself broke down, weeping openly before all. The soldiers shifted uneasily, their eyes full of sympathy for the man. I know, Lance continued, his voice cutting deep, that you serve Prince Rhaegar. But look at yourselves. You wear the red dragon on your breast. You are Targaryen men, sworn to the king. He drew in a breath, voice rising like a thunderclap. Now think. If you gave your all for crown and realm, only to return home and find your wife despoiled, your children butchered, would you endure it? To defile the king's savior is to defile the king himself. To insult Lord Rivera is to insult not only his grace, but Prince Rhaegar as well. His words lit a fire in their hearts. Would you suffer men to rape your wives and murder your kin? No, the soldiers roared. Would you allow your king to be shamed before your very eyes? No. The fury in their voices shook the air. Their eyes blazed like wolves set upon prey, and every gaze turned upon Roland. Cold dread crept over him. His throat tightened. Why do my own men look at me like enemies? Lance's voice cut through like a blade. Soldiers. Faced with the enemies who raped your wives, slaughtered your kin, and dishonored your king, what do you do? Kill. 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 The cry thundered like storm and steel, echoing off the walls. Roland shuddered. A sudden hot wetness spread down his legs. He longed to run, but his knees would not obey. Surrounded by these rabid wolves, where could he possibly go? Lance's mouth curled into a thin, satisfied smile. Then what are you waiting for? In the king's name, kill! Roar! With that, the Targaryen host surged forward, no longer bound by hesitation. They fell upon Roland like a flood unleashed, some hacking and smashing at Richard's head as if to erase even his memory. Roland's scream never came, he was swallowed whole by the tide. Lance, meanwhile, had already reined his destrier aside, leading Ravera and the others to safety. "You! Sir Barristan Selmy," the famed bold Barristan, stared at him, shaken. For all his years of service, even he could not disguise his astonishment. "You turned his own men upon him with but a few words." "Lance, those were Dragonstone soldiers, Rhaegar's men." "They were never his men," Lance replied coolly. "They are soldiers of House Targaryen. And only the king commands the dragon's host." "Ah!" For a moment, Barristan let out a long breath. Relief, almost exhilaration, washed over him. Ever since King Aerys had been taken captive, whispers had filled the realm, whispers that Rhaegar should take the throne. The tide was nearly overwhelming. Alone, even the bold could not stand against the full weight of the royal council. But now, with Lance at his side, perhaps the king's rule could yet be made strong again. Still, he could not help but warn the fiery young knight. "You slew Richard. Have you thought how you'll answer to Prince Rhaegar?" "Answer?" Lance scoffed. "I wear the white cloak of the Kingsguard. I answer only to the king." His voice hardened, edged with steel. "And let me be clear, I slew not only Richard Lynmouth, but also Miles Mouton." "What of it? Prince Rhaegar? Let the boy sit the throne first, then I'll answer him." Barristan studied the younger man's defiance, his unyielding spirit. Reckless, yes. Dangerous, without question. But in that boldness he saw a reflection of his own youth, when he too had been a knight the world could not bend. "Tell me, lad," Barristan said at last, smiling for the first time, his tone almost fatherly. "How does this sound to you, Lancelot the Fearless?" Chapter 20, Chapter 20 King's Landing. Chapter 20 King's Landing. 3 days. The slaughter raged for 3 whole days. Duskendale ran red with blood, the executioners swung their blades without pause, never once blinking an eye. Lance himself struck off the head of Dennis Darklyn. His severed skull, already beginning to dry in the wind, hung from the city walls. His wife and the steward, those treacherous lovers, never made it beyond the harbour. A mob of townsfolk recognized them and beat them to death where they stood. By the time their corpses were dragged before Lance, they were little more than mangled heaps. The people's hatred burned hottest for Dennis's foreign wife, Cyrilla of Mere. They ripped out her tongue while she still lived, carved away her breasts and her womanhood, and visited every cruelty they knew upon her body. Yet to Lance's surprise, many still clung to their love for Dennis Darklyn. At the city gates, groups gathered to sing the 7-pointed star, praising the man who had defied the king in the name of the small folks' rights. At last, with the breeze against his face and the sound of hooves on the road, Lance reached the outskirts of King's Landing. He glanced at the phantom panel, only he could see the Rhaegar Targaryen template had reached 80% fusion. The sheer number of Darklyns and Hollards had been staggering. In a town of scarcely 20,000 souls, nearly 300 nobles lived off the fat of the land, demanding comforts far above their station, though few of them had true titles. Beside him, Sir Barristan the Bold stole glances his way, unable to mask his disquiet. Lance chose to ignore him. His conduct at Duskendale had been cold-blooded even by Westerosi standards. If not for the system halting his progress at 80% and replacing it with some advanced task, he might as well have slain every last rebel himself. Even so, after personally trying and beheading dozens, Lance had become the executioner's undisputed champion, the one with the highest tally of kills. He tried to draw in the air of King's Landing to clear his chest of the bloodlust lingering there. Instead, a stench so foul assaulted him that he nearly retched. Cough cough. Gods, he spat, gagging, 7 hells, what reeks so badly? The taste clung to his tongue, and no amount of spitting rid him of it. Barristan chuckled. First time in King's Landing. "Aye," Lance admitted, glaring at the knight's twitching lips. "You'll get used to it," Sir Barristan said with a booming laugh, stroking his long, noble beard as though recalling some old jest. Then he rode forward, spreading his arms wide and pointing up at the massive crimson gate before them, its surface carved with dragons, wings unfurled and seeming to writhe in the sunlight. "Welcome to King's Landing, Sire. Welcome back to King's Landing, my lords." Beneath the dragon gate stood a stout, broad man, arms outstretched in greeting. Lance nudged his horse forward, studying the man from on high. Though they had met but once in council, he remembered the face. He inclined his head politely. "My thanks for your welcome, Lord Chelstead." Lord Carlton Chelstead, Master of Coin. On his chest gleamed the sigil of House Chelstead, a crossed mace and silver dagger. The man visibly relaxed at Lance's courtesy. This newly made Kingsguard knight had earned a fearsome reputation. In the council chamber itself, he had cut down Sir Ilan Payne before Tywin Lannister's very eyes. And now word from Duskendale told of butchery and cold resolve. Lancelot was not a man one trifled with. Indeed, upon his return, even Lord Tywin Lannister had said aloud, "Lancelot is the king's mad dog." Though his palms were damp with sweat, Lord Carlton Chelstead kept his smile warm and practiced. Perhaps it was the heat of King's Landing, perhaps the heat of politics, but either way, he dared not falter. "Your deeds at Duskendale have won every man's admiration, Sire," Chelstead said smoothly. His tone, tinged with flattery, held no trace of condescension. "To ride alone into danger, to bring his grace out alive, and then to strike down scores of rebels with your own hand, small folk and lords alike now call you Lance the Just." Had. Lance chuckled softly and glanced sidelong at Barristan Selmy, as if to say, "Keep your title of the bold. I'll manage without it." "You flatter me, my lord." Sliding from his saddle, Lance returned Chelstead's courtesy with an easy smile. He was no stranger to the give and take of noble politicking. Courtesy costs little, and the man's words made it plain he meant no harm. "When his grace and I were held in chains," Lance said, lowering his voice just enough for effect, "the king spoke of you more than once. Lord Chelstead," he said, "is the steward I trust above all others. The prosperity of King's Landing rests on his shoulders." He let the words linger, then added, "Had it been you seated in the hand's chair, the king believes we would have been freed from Duskendale long ago." Of course, the king had never said such a thing, but there was no way for Chelstead to ask him now. The Master of Coin's eyes lit with satisfaction. Already favourable toward the young knight, his regard deepened. The two traded pleasantries beneath the Dragon Gate, until even Sir Barristan, no lover of courtly speech, grew faintly nauseated by the honeyed words. He had thought Lance a kindred spirit, reckless, defiant, unmoved by pomp. Yet here the man stood, smiling and parrying flatteries like any other ambitious knight. "Seven save us," Barristan thought. "Even this one? Sir Lance?" Chelstead's tone shifted as the pleasantries waned. His eyes studied the young knight with new-found approval, and for a moment he even thought, were he not sworn to White, I'd wed my daughter to him in a heartbeat. Glancing about to ensure no ears were near, Chelstead leaned close and dropped his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I hear you slew Richard Lynmouth and Miles Mouton at Duskendale." Lance did not blink. "I." Those two defied the king's law and tormented both highborn and lowborn alike. By his grace's own authority, I judged them guilty and struck them down. Your sense of justice does you honour, sire." Chelstead nodded gravely, but his next words were hushed. "Then you should know this Prince Rhaegar arrived in the city last night." Lance's eyes narrowed. Prince Rhaegar. On the road to King's Landing, Sir Barristan had spoken of him often, heir to the throne, Prince of Dragonstone, son to the king. Yet for half a year of his father's imprisonment, the prince had never once stirred from Dragonstone, save to dispatch Richard Lynmouth with a token force. To all appearances, Rhaegar had cared little whether Aerys lived or died. But now, mere days after Aerys's return to the capital, the prince had come in person. That was telling. Is he here for me? My thanks for the warning, my lord, Lance said at last, sincerity in his voice if not in his thoughts. Chelstead inclined his head. He had no wish to press further, better to plant the seed and let it grow. Too many words left too many weaknesses to be seized upon. With Chelstead leading the way, the party passed through the Dragon Gate and made for the Red Keep. Rhaegar Targaryen. Lance's gaze swept up toward Aegon's High Hill, where the crimson bricks of Maegor's holdfast loomed like the open jaws of a dragon. A dangerous light flickered in his eyes as he murmured, "Whatever game you mean to play, my prince, I'll be waiting." Chapter 21, Chapter 21 The Fairest Maiden in the Seven Kingdoms. Chapter 21 The Fairest Maiden in the Seven Kingdoms. The Tower of the Hand. A barefoot girl of barely 13 crept up the winding stairs, her lips curved in a sly little smile. On another face, such an expression might have seemed lewd or impish. But on hers, framed by flawless features and golden hair, it lent her a playful charm. She tiptoed toward her father's back, ready to spring a childish ambush when a measured, commanding voice cut her short. "Stop this nonsense, Cersei." The sudden rebuke froze her in place. Blushing, she stood stiffly, unable to muster a reply. Lord Tywin Lannister turned, his stern gaze falling upon his daughter in her pale green gown, the bloom of youth clinging to her like perfume. Yet his emerald eyes showed no softness, only reproof. "Father! I only meant..." She dared not meet his eyes, fingers twining nervously before her skirts. "I only wanted to spare you from working too hard. That is not for you to concern yourself with." Even in the face of her timid care, Tywin's tone remained cold, distant, more fitting for a servant than his own blood. He set aside his quill, his eyes sharp and leonine, his voice carrying the weight of command. "You are 13 years of age, Cersei. At that age, I was already studying the histories, training daily with sword and lance, preparing myself to one day rule the Westerlands. Not wasting my days in idleness like your grandsire, who made our house a laughingstock. You are not a son, but you still bear the name Lannister. That name carries duties. Family comes before all else. Do you understand?" "Yes, father." Her reply was faint, her lips trembling. She turned quickly, fleeing through the door, before he could read the defiance kindling in her heart. Tywin only shook his head, then turned his gaze toward the crimson-armored guard at the door. "I am bound for the king's presence. Keep watch over her." "Yes, my lord." Dash. Cersei ran until she reached the garden. Her chest heaved, her eyes glistened, wet not with sorrow, but with rage. "All your fault, all your fault." She tore at blossoms, ripped shrubs apart, trampling the carefully kept paths into ruin. The flowers, in her fury, became her enemies. "Damn you, you cursed little monster! Hell-spawned imp! If not for you, mother would still live. Father would not treat us like this." Her voice rose to a scream, her face twisted with hatred. And then, a sudden rustle in the flower bed before her. From the greenery slid a serpent, its scales gleaming with bands of color, its forked tongue tasting the air as it fixed cold eyes upon her. Most girls her age would have shrieked, fled, perhaps fainted outright. But Cersei was not most girls. For an instant she faltered. Then she lifted her chin, teeth clenched, her green eyes blazing. "You dare not bite me, beast! I am Cersei Lannister, daughter of the Hand of the King, and one day I will be queen. You filthy creature are unworthy to touch my noble flesh. Now begone!" She raised a delicate finger, pointing down at the snake as though issuing a royal decree. Never once did it cross her mind that beasts do not bow to commands. Hiss! The serpent coiled tighter, unblinking, its tongue flickering in defiance. The serpent's slit-pupilled eyes fixed on the proud young girl before it. With a sudden coil of its tail, it lunged, fangs bared. "Ah!" Cersei screamed, throwing her hands over her eyes, collapsing backward in terror. But the pain she braced for never came. Instead, a cool gust brushed her cheek and a gentle, resonant voice sounded at her side. "You are safe now, my lady." She hesitated, trembling, then lowered her hands. Her emerald eyes widened. A tall, broad-shouldered knight stood before her, clad in pure white. Sunlight gleamed across the polished steel of his armor. His face strikingly handsome, smiling warmly seemed to banish all shadows from her heart. Cersei's breath caught. For all the gallant lords she had admired, even for the Silver Prince Rhaegar himself, this man seemed yet more radiant. "The beast is slain. You needn't fear." He gestured lightly to the serpent, now hacked cleanly in two, its body still twitching on the grass. Then, with courtesy, he extended his hand. Her throat worked as she swallowed, and instinctively she placed her slender fingers in his palm. The warmth of his grip made her cheeks flush deeper. "I thank you for saving me, sire." When he drew her to her feet, she found herself unable to reach even his chest. She took a deep breath, suppressing the strange urge to rest her head against the white breastplate before her. Instead, she lifted her skirts politely and dipped in a curtsy. "Helping a lady as fair as you is an honor for any knight," the stranger said with an easy smile. Yet he did not release her hand. His thumb brushed slowly across her soft skin, as though savoring it. Smooth, like silk. Cersei, far from recoiling, seemed to bask in it. Her green eyes glistened as they lingered on his face, her lips parted, breath quickening. "Lance, we must be going." The spell shattered. Sir Barristan Selmy's stern voice cut between them. Cersei snatched her hand away at once. Lance sighed with a trace of regret, sheathed his sword, and gave her a playful shrug. "I must take my leave, fair lady." With that, he strode off, leaving only his tall, gallant back in her sight. I am Cersei Lannister, sire." The words burst from her lips before she could stop them. She hurried forward a step, calling after him. Lance arched a brow. So this is the one they call the fairest maid of the Seven Kingdoms. But he betrayed little surprise. Instead, he raised a hand in casual farewell, his voice drifting back with a smile. "If you remain in the Red Keep, I've no doubt we shall meet again. Remember this, my name is Lancelot." And with Barristan, he vanished from view. Cersei stood rooted, watching long after he was gone. She licked her lips softly, whispering to herself, "Lancelot." Moments later, the panting red-clad guard finally caught up. At once she masked her expression with icy disdain, snapping, "You are late, sire." Meanwhile, Barristan walked beside Lance, eyeing him warily. "You are smiling, and your steps are light. Tell me, sire, you have not grown too fond of that girl, have you? She is Tywin Lannister's daughter. And we are sworn brothers of the Kingsguard." He spoke firmly, a reminder etched in steel. "You know our vows: no wife, no children, no inheritance. Our lives belong only to the king." "Thank you for the lesson," Lance replied dryly, shooting him a glare. His good mood soured by Barristan's admonishment, he muttered inwardly, "Always the killjoy. As if vows ever stopped half the Kingsguard before me. And besides, only a fool would serve as a Kingsguard for life." The words slipped out, low and scornful. By the time they reached the doors of the council chamber, silence had settled between them again. But it shattered as soon as they drew near. "Get out! Out!" The king's voice thundered from within, shrill with fury. "By the Seven, I need none of your guards, none of your council, and I will hear none of your insolent demands. Take your men and crawl back to Dragonstone. Without my leave, you will not set foot in King's Landing again." Chapter 22, Chapter 22 Dawn. Chapter 22 Dawn. Lance furrowed his brow, exchanging a quick glance with Sir Barristan before striding through the bronze and oak doors. A long carpet stretched from the entrance all the way to the throne. At the far end rose the narrow steps, upon which sat a grotesque monstrosity of a chair, thousands of blades hammered and twisted together into what men called the Iron Throne. To Lance's eyes, it was nothing more than a spiked, jagged heap of blackened steel. The king sat upon it now, flailing his arms in agitation, hurling curses down at the men below. With each reckless movement, curved blades sliced at his skin, leaving fresh gashes across his body. The sight made Sir Gerald Hightower, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, visibly anxious, yet without the king's leave, even he dared not intervene. The other 2 white knights present in the hall fared no better, standing rooted to their places, unwilling to risk Aerys' wrath. 7 hells, Lance swore under his breath. I bled and fought to drag you out of Duskendale alive, and now you'll let yourself die impaled on your own damned chair? Jaw tight, he strode forward, his voice ringing out across the hall. Your Grace! Lance! At the sound of his name, King Aerys grew even more frantic. His hands beat against the throne's arms as tears welled in his eyes. You've returned, he muttered, as if seeing not a knight, but a long-lost son. Yet every movement only drew more blood as the throne's cruel edges carved into him again and again. Before the watching court, Lance did not hesitate. He pressed forward through the narrow channel, steel scraping steel as jagged blades screeched across his white armor, even sparking as they bit against him. He looked upon the king's torn, bleeding form and cursed inwardly. What kind of madman designed a throne like this? No wonder he's half crazed already. And the cuts, does no one here worry about infection? About rot? For a moment, Lance almost pitied the man. Here he sat, bleeding upon his own throne, and not a single soul offered him comfort. Madness seemed almost a mercy. With a sigh, and under 100 pairs of watching eyes, the White Knight stretched out his arms and lifted the king bodily from the Iron Throne. And most shocking of all, Aerys did not resist. He gave no angry commands, no shrieks of defiance. Instead, he only leaned into Lance's strength, smiling faintly, almost peacefully, as if at last the cruel chair had released him from torment. That familiar feeling, so safe. You there? Under 100 astonished gazes, Sir Lance descended the steps with long, steady strides, setting King Aerys gently upon the floor. He beckoned impatiently toward a stooped old man standing slack-jawed in the hall. Aerys, once released, wore an oddly wistful look in his violet eyes, as if he preferred being carried. Archmaester! The old man stammered as he shuffled forward, bent back, curving even further in an unconscious bow toward the White Knight. Grand Maester Pycelle, isn't it? Lance asked flatly. See to his grace's wounds. At this rate, the throne will kill him before any usurper does. The maester bobbed his head, beard trembling, and set to work. For all his trembling hands and frail demeanor, Pycelle proved efficient enough, rolling up his sleeves and producing an endless array of jars, vials, and salves from the depths of his voluminous robes until they were stacked neatly at his side. 7 save us, Lance thought with a trace of dry humor. If I hadn't known his true game, I'd swear he was little more than a kindly old healer. Who would ever suspect this tottering crow would outlive half the realm's lions and wolves alike? You are Sir Lancelot. The words came not from the maester but from the tall figure at the center of the hall. He was striking tall and fair, with silver hair falling loose to his shoulders, though his eyes gleamed not with Aerys' fevered purple but the deep indigo of pure Valyria. Clad in a flowing black robe of Targaryen tradition rather than armor, Prince Rhaegar radiated melancholy like a cloak. Behind him stood 3 knights, 2 in white and 1 in sable. Even without an introduction, Lance knew exactly who he faced. Your Highness! He bowed low in a knight's salute, but rose swiftly, hand resting on his sword hilt as he placed himself squarely before the king, posture as sharp and vigilant as any sworn Kingsguard on duty. Rhaegar's gaze lingered, shadowed and intent, his sorrowful air deepening. He was every inch the prince who was born in grief. And Lance recalled the story whispered through the realm, how on the night of Rhaegar's birth, King Aegon V had summoned all his kin to Summer Hall, hoping with the aid of pyromancers and wildfire to hatch dragon eggs and restore House Targaryen's glory. Instead came only fire and ruin Aegon himself, his son Prince Duncan the Small, and Sir Duncan the Tall of the Kingsguard perishing in the inferno. That calamity had paved the way for Jaehaerys II, and then, far too soon, for Aerys. In truth, the Targaryens had always been short-lived 17 kings in barely 2 centuries, most driven to madness as surely as moths to flame. Perhaps 200 years of brothers marrying sisters was bound to twist more than just their minds, Lance mused darkly. You. So you're Lancelot? The shout came from behind Rhaegar. One of the White Knights stepped forward, face flushed with fury. You murdered Sir Richard Lynmouth and Sir Miles Mouton. Sir Oswell went all but spat the words, ripping his sword free and levelling it toward Lance's face. Draw your blade. I, Sir Oswell went, challenge you to single combat. Lance's eyes narrowed. Ah, so the so-called Kingsguard finds his courage only when it comes to avenging special friends. His gaze flicked to Rhaegar, who merely stood silent, making no effort to restrain his knight. Behind the prince, the other White Knight rested his great pale blade on the floor, a mocking smile curling his lips as if waiting to be amused. Enough, Lance snapped, stepping forward. His breastplate pressed against Oswell's sword, forcing the steel back with sheer weight of will. His tone was sharp, commanding, as though scolding a green recruit. To bear steel in the King's Hall before his grace himself is no act of a Kingsguard knight. Sheath your blade, sire, before you shame the white cloak you wear. His blue eyes blazed with such unflinching resolve that Sir Oswell faltered, retreating step by step beneath his pressure. Only when a firm hand gripped Oswell's shoulder did he halt. Steady your step, sire, came a lilting, careless voice. A pale-haired knight leaned lazily forward, violet eyes glimmering with amusement beneath his white helm. I am certain Sir Oswell meant no harm. Surely, he wished only to demonstrate his swordsmanship before his grace. The words carried no threat, yet they rang with an authority that made Oswell swallow hard. And just like that, with a shrug and a smile, Sir Arthur Dane had smoothed over what might have been branded treason. Chapter 23, Chapter 23 My sword has never failed me. Chapter 23 My sword has never failed me. I agree with you, Sir Arthur. The man before him hadn't introduced himself, but only a fool would fail to recognize the legendary knight clad in the white of the Kingsguard, bearing the wide, pale blade that gleamed like moonlight. Arthur Dane. The Sword of the Morning. In the Chronicles, Sir Jaime Lannister once quipped that Dane could hold his member in one hand and still cut down 5 Kingsguard with the other. Perhaps Jaime exaggerated, but even if true, he hadn't been speaking of the men here today. After all, Barry Stan Selmy alone would have made that feat nigh impossible. Even so, with his present strength, Lance found it difficult enough to imagine defeating Prince Rhaegar, let alone this man hailed across the realm as the greatest knight of the 7 kingdoms. With Arthur standing firmly on his side, Lance chose not to press Oswell Went's earlier offense further. Still, he had no intention of simply letting the matter slide. I do agree with you, he repeated, then shifted his gaze to the long sword still pressing against his chest. Lifting his head, he flashed a grin. In the few days since the carnage at Duskendale, the aura of blood about him had grown heavy. Even a smile from Lance carried menace enough to chill the bones. Sir Oswell Went shuddered, lowering his blade at once, unable to meet his eyes. Well then, if we're to see a display of swordplay, let's begin, Sir Oswell. Lance's voice was calm, but carried clearly to every ear in the throne room. Arthur's smirk faltered. His violet eyes narrowed as he studied the brash young knight before him. He had not expected such open defiance. Are you certain, Sir Lance? He asked gravely, brushing aside Oswell Went with a single hand. Do you truly mean for Sir Oswell to demonstrate his skill here and now? Why not? Lance shrugged lightly, the ghost of a challenge playing at his lips. I've yet to see the swordsmanship of my brothers in white. I find myself most eager. He stepped closer, meeting Arthur's gaze without a trace of fear. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to take his place, Sir Arthur. To show us the fabled swordsmanship of House Dane. That, Lance added with a slow clap, would be even better. A hush fell over the hall. Only the faint groans of King Aerys echoed, as Pycelle tended silently to the fresh cuts wrought by the Iron Throne. Even Rhaegar Targaryen frowned, casting a questioning look toward Sir Barristan at Lance's side, as if to ask, is he always this reckless? Arthur's gaze lingered at Lance's throat, weighing for a moment whether the impudent knight might not deserve to lose his head. Dash! Then came laughter. Wild, shrill, unrestrained. Ha! Ha ha ha! Good! Good! King Aerys clapped his hands together like a mad child, his thin shoulders shaking with glee. Only then did the lords and knights present notice that Grand Maester Pycelle had finished binding his wounds. Say what one might of Pycelle, at least he was diligent. Not once had he allowed the tension in the hall to distract him, tending to the king's injuries in silence. Perhaps it was this very discretion that had kept him alive and in favor through 6 monarchs, surviving coups and usurpations alike, until his end in old age. I find Sir Lance's suggestion delightful. Supported by Barristan, the king rose, his violet eyes now fixed on Dawn, the pale great sword at Arthur Dane's side. It has been over a year since we last met, Sir Arthur, has it not? Yes, your grace, Dane inclined his head. Even the sword of the morning bent the knee to the king's presence. The last time was at the tourney in Lanny Sport. Yes. I recall you were champion. You remember well, your grace. Aerys adjusted the crown upon his tangled hair and let out a wistful sigh. Yet it is a pity, sire. Justs and melees show us little of Dane's true art, do they not? He leaned forward, the smile on his lips both eager and cruel. Perhaps you might indulge us here, as Sir Lance has proposed. Show us the swordplay of House Dane. Here. Now. The words fell with the softness of a request, but no one in the hall mistook them for anything less than a king's command. At those words, Sir Arthur Dane's face hardened, the playful smirk gone. My sword is for slaying your grace's enemies, he said gravely, not for performance. It was no surprise Arthur refused outright. Though sworn to Aerys, the pride of House Dane would not allow so demeaning a command. For thousands of years, since the Dawn Age itself, the Danes of Starfall had borne Dawn, a great sword forged from the heart of a fallen star. Through the ages, House Dane had ruled as kings of the Torrentine before bending the knee to Sun's pair. And across the centuries, there had been many who earned the title Sword of the Morning Knights, whose names blazed like the blade they bore. Dawn had drunk the blood of countless foes. Yet never had it been brandished as a bauble for sport. To do so now would stain the honor of both blade and house. Should Arthur submit, he would be remembered not as the greatest of the sword-bearers, but as the most ridiculous. You would defy the king's command, Sir Arthur. Lance stepped forward, voice sharp as a drawn blade. Have you forgotten the white cloak you wear, or the vows you swore? Or perhaps... His eyes flicked meaningfully to Prince Rhaegar. Perhaps your true loyalty lies elsewhere. Impudent cur! At last another knight could bear no more. A black-armored man strode forth, fury blazing, jabbing a gauntlet finger toward Lance's face. How dare you sow discord between his grace and Prince Rhaegar? Do not think that pulling the king from Duskendale gives you leave to speak so brazenly. The deaths of Sir Richard Lynmouth and Sir Miles Mouton are debts yet unpaid. Lance's eyes narrowed to slits. I do not know your name, but your tongue is louder than all of ours combined. If I hear it wag in the king's hall again, I swear I will cut it from your mouth myself. Unless... He gestured casually to the massive great sword at his back, gift of Sir Gerald Hightower, you would care to test whether my blade is sharp. The knight bristled, hand flying to his hilt. My own sword has never failed me. I am John Connington. Enough. Rugger's hand clamped down on Connington's, holding the blade fast in its scabbard. He insults you again and again, Connington growled, still straining. Let me strike him down, Rugger. I said enough. The prince's violet eyes glimmered with warning. At that look, John Connington fell silent, swallowing his rage. Only Lance studied the two men, noting the closeness of their locked hands, the tension between them. A shadow of doubt flickered across his thoughts. Dragonstone customs are freer than I imagined. Strange. He shook his head. No. Rugger risked a kingdom for Lioness Stark. This can't be what it looks like. And yet. He frowned, glancing back toward Aerys. That such quarrels could break into open challenge in the King's Hall, with swords nearly drawn before the Iron Throne itself, was telling. The king's authority had waned in these long months of captivity, his crown no longer commanded fear. As Lance pondered, the echo of firm footsteps carried into the hall. Every head turned. A tall man in a crimson robe entered, his stride measured, his bearing regal. The hand of the king. Tywin Lannister. Your Grace. Your Highness. His voice rang strong, polished, and commanding, more kingly than the king himself. What do you want, Tywin? Aerys snapped, his voice laced with spite. Clutching Lance's hand, he near fled back to the Iron Throne, collapsing into it as if to stake his claim before Tywin could. Lance sighed, standing stiff and resolute before his king. Tywin, by contrast, betrayed nothing. His golden eyes remained unreadable as he watched the pitiful scene unfold. Only once Aerys had settled did Tywin incline his head slightly toward Rugger. As you commanded, my prince, he said, voice firm. I have brought them. A shadow lifted from Rugger's features. His lips curved in the faintest smile as his gaze slipped past Lance. Then let them enter, my lord, the prince said without seeking his father's leave. Chapter 24, Chapter 24 The Murderer. Chapter 24 The Murderer. At Prince Rugger's command, Tywin Lannister clapped his hands toward the doors. Neither man spared King Aerys a single glance throughout the exchange. With unspoken agreement, they treated the rightful monarch as though he were no more than heir. Moments later, several soldiers entered the council chamber, clad in black chainmail and draped in heavy golden cloaks. Between them, they ushered in two frightened women. These were men of the city watch of King's Landing, better known as the Gold Cloaks, for the thick golden wool they wore upon their shoulders. Their duty was to guard the capital and serve the royal family, carrying out the commands of its members. In theory, the city watch answered to the Master of Laws. But in truth, the current holder of that office, Lord Simon Stanton, was a feeble man, too timid to oppose the hand of the king at council. Were it not for the iron will of Sir Manly Stokeworth, the watch's commander, the Gold Cloaks would already have fallen fully under Tywin's sway. Even so, many within their ranks already bent toward the Lord of Casterly Rock. Who are these women? And what, Tywin, do you mean by this? King Aerys shifted upon the Iron Throne, violet eyes flashing with agitation. His voice betrayed the first quiver of another fit of madness, but the sight of the tall figure of Sir Lance before him, and the hard steel of the throne itself, seemed to steady him. Your Grace, Tywin replied evenly, as though Aerys's rasping tone had not grated upon him. I know nothing of this matter. You should ask Prince Rugger. I merely obeyed his command. Having spoken, he withdrew into silence, washing his hands clean of responsibility. That sly old fox! Lance frowned, his gaze sliding toward the two women trembling in the hall's center. A fleeting glimmer of surprise and danger flashed in his eyes. He did not know how Tywin had found them, nor for what purpose they had been brought, but he knew well enough this was aimed at him. The killing of Sir Ilan Payne at the council still lingered like an unhealed wound. Clearly, Tywin Lannister was not as forgiving as the songs would have him. And yet, something nagged at him. 2 women stood before him. But should it not have been 3? Where was the other? Rhaegar. The king's cracked voice rang once more from the throne. This time it carried sharp accusation, his violet eyes boring into his air with suspicion and demand. In answer to his father's confusion, Rhaegar first adjusted the folds of his black robe. Whatever the circumstance, the prince never failed to preserve his elegance. Only then did he speak, his voice calm, deliberate. Last night, quite by accident, I overheard troubling things, very troubling, about the man who stands before you, Sir Lancelot. His words hung heavy in the hall. It is plain, Rhaegar went on smoothly, that this Kingsguard whom you so favour has not merely carried out your commands in Duskendale. No, he has committed other deeds as well. Darker deeds. Deeds most vile. As he spoke, the prince turned to Lance with a gentle smile, courtly and polite. Yet to Lance, that smile was poison, its charm nothing more than a mask for malice. In truth, Rhaegar had every advantage a man might wield over women: noble birth, striking beauty, unmatched skill with the sword, and a voice and harp that could melt hearts. It was no wonder that so many high-born maidens dreamed of him. But the notion, oft repeated in songs, that a few strokes upon his silver-stringed harp could reduce men to silence and women to tears, this Lance found hard to credit. A prince's very breath drew praise, and Rhaegar was already well schooled in music. Lance, having heard him play first-hand, knew the truth of it. Other deeds. Aerys frowned, violet eyes narrowing as he glanced toward the 2 women trembling in the hall. They looked worn and hollow-eyed, as though robbed of sleep for many nights. Their cloths were plain but neat, yet their eyes were red with weeping, their throats and necks marred by faint bruises. And both stared at Lance with a look that mingled dread and hatred. The king's breath caught. Could it be? A suspicion seized him, widening his gaze. No need for questions, the truth, to him, was plain. Lance had wronged these common-born women. Had he not once already been imprisoned for an escapade in a brothel? No, he must be shielded. The Kingsguard swore vows never to wed or father children, yet all knew well enough that men were not made of stone. The sole exception was Sir Barristan the Bold, whose unyielding honour had become near legend. Though desired by half the women of King's Landing, Barristan Selmy had never drawn whisper of scandal. It was beyond belief. But Barristan was only one man. Others, when needs grew strong, found their way to the pillow houses, or kept quiet mistresses. The realm turned a blind eye. After all, the Kingsguard were still men, not eunuchs like the Unsullied, shorn root and stem from boyhood. And yet, in his fevered mind, Aerys decided if these women dared accuse Lance of rape, they would burn. Burn by wildfire. His fingers clenched upon the Iron Throne's armrest, reopening the half-healed cut in his palm. A thin line of blood welled fresh. "Speak, Maris," Rhaegar commanded. His head was held high, his smile radiant as though kindly, but every word carried the weight of a prince born to command. "Tell his grace what you told me. I am certain the wise and just Aerys Targaryen, second of his name, will see justice done." The woman called Maris stepped forward, trembling so hard her teeth nearly chattered. Then, with a sudden drop, she fell to her knees. Her coarse skirts shifted, baring the swell of her breast. "I am Maris, from Duskendale, your grace." Never before had she stood before such great lords. Fear and awe shook her to her bones, but her voice rang steady. "Why are you here, Maris?" Aerys asked, his tone feigning gentleness though a flicker of killing fire burned in his purple eyes. Once, before his fall, he had been a king of promise, temperate, even kind to the lowborn. He had dreamed even of raising a new wall with Lord Rickard Stark to shield the realm from foes unknown. But that was long ago. Bitterness had soured him, child after child had died, and the cheers for Tywin Lannister at the tourney of Lanny Sport had twisted his pride into envy. His friendship with his hand had rotted into rancour. His descent had begun in Duskendale, when his stubborn folly led him to months of imprisonment. Aerys pressed his temples with his fingers, his thoughts blurring. The hall wavered before his eyes. When his vision cleared, the woman was already weeping, pouring out her plea. "We could not endure our lives any longer, and so we came to King's Landing. We beg your grace for justice. Let the murderer be punished as he deserves." "What?" The king started, coughing lightly, his gaze vacant. "Murderer? What murderer? Had she not come to accuse of rape? Where had this turn come from? That man." Maris lifted a shaking arm and pointed at Lance. Her face twisted with rage, voice shrill with venom. "He is no Sir Lancelot. He is no knight at all. He is a blacksmith who lived across from me, a bastard without name or father. 4 nights past, he broke into my home. He butchered my husband and 2 knights who stood in his way." Chapter 25, Chapter 25 The Hand Severed. Chapter 25 The Hand Severed. Maris's accusations hung in the air. Aerys's fingers twitched upon the Iron Throne, violet eyes narrowing on the broad white-clad back before him. To the astonishment of those watching, there was even a trace of admiration in the king's gaze. For Aerys did not despise lustful men. Once, he had been one himself. At 19, he had taken the crown a young king, bright with passion and vigor, and endlessly curious about the beauty of high-born maidens across the 7 kingdoms. Though wed, by tradition, to his sister Rilla, that had never kept him from dallying with other noble women. Only after his son Jaehaerys died in the cradle had grief driven him to madness. In a fit of piety or guilt he had executed every mistress he kept, swearing before the 7 never again to share his bed with any save his queen. But bedding another man's wife, then slaughtering the husband and silencing witnesses? That was glorious. A thought no sane king would ever have. But this was Aerys II Targaryen, who could never be read by the measures of other men. "You have nothing to say, Sir Lancelot," Aerys croaked. "Or should I name you more truly? Lance the Smith." In the center of the hall, Rhaegar stood tall and graceful, his black robes immaculate, his indigo eyes locked on the impassive knight. A flicker of fury passed across the prince's face. He took a step forward, voice sharp with accusation. "You donned a false name and deceived the king, worming your way close to him. At Duskendale, you committed vile atrocities, murdering 2 valiant knights, butchering common folk without mercy. I, Rhaegar Targaryen, Prince of Dragonstone, hereby name you traitor and—" "Silence!" The shout cut him short, leaving his words like a blade snapped mid-swing. Rhaegar faltered, his head snapping up in disbelief. Lance had drawn his sword. His gauntlet hand leveled the point at the prince himself, his face blazing with righteous fury. "Do you seek the throne, Rhaegar Targaryen? Do you mean to usurp your father's crown?" The words struck the hall like thunder. Rhaegar froze, lips parting, yet no sound came forth. Usurp the throne? He had said no such thing. Why would he need to? He was heir. Once his father died, the throne was his by right. What sense was there in usurpation? "Watch your tongue, boy." Before the prince could gather his wits, Sir Oswell stepped forward, his voice harsh and scornful. "No Sir for Lance now only boy," as if his guilt were already proven. "We speak here of your crimes, slaying innocents, murdering knights in cold blood. Do not think to deflect by slandering the prince. No lord in this hall will stomach such insolence." He spat on the ground at Lance's feet. "To don the white cloak beside us, what a mockery! You have shamed the Kingsguard, shamed the honor of knighthood itself. You are no knight. You are nothing." His anger stoked the chamber. All eyes turned upon Lance. And beneath that withering scrutiny, the White Knight at last replied, his voice low, deliberate, cutting through the hall with iron calm. "Honor, Sir Oswell? You dare speak of honor to me?" His gaze hardened, a mocking smile flickering at the edge of his lips. You have no place to weigh me in that balance. None of you do. With narrowed eyes, Sir Lance swept his gaze across the hall, letting it rest a heartbeat on each man, each lord, each white cloak. Not only you. Lance ignored Oswell's gnashing teeth. The corners of his mouth lifted slightly as he gave a cold snort. None of you here, he declared, his voice echoing through the hall, are worthy to even speak the word honor before me. The chamber erupted in shock. Even Tywin Lannister could not help but cast Lance a look of genuine surprise. He had always known this knight was unyielding after all. Lance had slain Sir Ilan Payne before Tywin's very eyes without hesitation. But to brazenly utter such arrogance before 4 Kingsguard at once, including their Lord Commander Barristan the Bold himself, this was beyond what Tywin had expected. You dare spew such madness? Humiliated before so many, Sir Oswell Went could contain himself no longer. He drew his sword once again, pointing it at Lance before the Iron Throne. His voice thundered with rage. You wretched, base-born cur! To soil the sacred name of honor before these great lords unforgivable. Mark my words. Trial by combat or not, I, Oswell Went, will see your head struck from your shoulders. He spoke with righteous fury, posturing as though he were the very embodiment of knightly valor, his blade gleaming as it leveled at Lance. Twice. Lance's eyelids lifted lazily, his blue eyes meeting the sword's edge without a trace of fear. What do you mean, twice? Before Oswell could finish, one of the white-cloaked Kingsguard stepped forward, steel rasping as his blade left its scabbard. He advanced toward Oswell without hesitation. Hold, boy! It was Arthur Dane, dawn in hand, striding forward to intercept Lance. But before his path could close, his view was filled with another flash of white. Barristan Selmy! Clang! Steel rang out as the 2 greatest knights in Westeros clashed before the Iron Throne itself. Stand aside, Sir Barristan! Arthur growled, teeth clenched, his pride unwilling to yield. Though confident against any foe, he knew better than to underestimate the man before him. Selmy's strength was proven, time and again, in the crucible of war. We've never crossed blades before, Sir Arthur. To Dane's surprise, Barristan did not yield. His eyes shone bright, alight with battle's fire. And I have longed to test the swordplay of House Dane. On the other side, John Connington unsheathed his own sword, moving to intervene only to be barred by yet another white cloak. Show no insolence before the king. The words rumbled like thunder, freezing Connington where he stood. Raising his eyes, he met the piercing glare of the White Bull, Gerald Hightower, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. Steel clashed, voices roared, and in moments the council chamber dissolved into chaos. Yet curiously, neither king nor hand made any move to stop it. Aerys sat motionless on his throne, watching as though the bloodshed were but a spectacle. Rhaegar quickly gathered Lady Maris and her daughter, shielding them to one side, a picture, almost, of a husband protecting his family. Pycelle, as ever, had already slunk into a corner, feigning invisibility. Twice, Oswell Went. Lance's voice cut through the din like thunder. With the great sword gifted by the White Bull in hand, he strode forward, his killing intent so thick it made Oswell's blood run cold. Oswell rushed him desperately, blade flashing shhh. But Lance swayed aside with effortless grace, as if he had foreseen the strike. Panic clawed at Oswell's heart. He pressed harder, pouring every ounce of strength into his swings. Yet Lance parried each one with fluid precision, his blade turning aside every attack as though swatting at gnats. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The calm, predatory look in those blue eyes, it was the same feeling as standing before Prince Rhaegar himself. In that instant of doubt, Lance's armored boot crashed into Oswell's chest, the force denting steel and hurling him back. Then, before the eyes of the court, Lance raised his sword high and brought it down with merciless strength. Shhh! Oswell's scream tore through the hall as his sword arm flew free, severed at the elbow, landing in the chamber with a sickening thud. All around, knights and lords froze. The clamor of battle died as men lowered their blades, stunned beyond words. Lance seized Oswell by the hair, dragging him like a dog, and flung him before the Iron Throne. The once proud Kingsguard could only lift his head in agony, eyes pleading toward the man he had sworn to protect. But King Aerys's violet gaze was as cold as ice. "I warned him once, Your Grace," Lance said, kneeling on one knee, his great sword planted in the floor. His voice rang clear across the hall. "He drew steel before you not once, but twice. An insult to the very dignity of the Iron Throne. Out of respect for your Majesty's mercy, I spared his life, and only took his sword hand as a lesson to any who would dare show you such disrespect. You have done well, Sir Lance." To everyone's astonishment, Aerys rose from the Iron Throne. For the first time in months, his hunched figure seemed to stand tall, pride swelling in his chest. He stepped forward, passing the fallen went without even a glance, and rested his hand upon Lance's helm. His cracked lips curved into a smile. A loyal son, a true knight. The thought flickered in his mind. Then his gaze shifted toward his own son, Rhaegar, and the faint smile curdled into scorn. Oswell's anguished cries broke the silence once more. Aerys turned toward Rhaegar with a snarl, his finger stabbing the air. "Pick it up." The prince blinked. "Father! I said pick it up," the Mad King screamed. "Pick up his hand." Dash. New chapter is coming soon. Write a review.